Good evening. Welcome to Reading the Receipts, our weekly look at what is the ongoing Justin Baldoni Blake Lively saga, and where we take all of the legal documents that have happened this week and talk about them and actually examine and read the receipts. Hey chat, how you doing? Hi Bell Moon. Hi Julia. Good to see you. Glad that you are here. Um, as always, right, we keep getting told you don't read the documents. So what this is about is us continuing to read the documents and keep going and keep updated. Before we jump in, the disclaimer, as always, we're going to look at some legal documents, but I am not a lawyer, as is going to become painfully obvious as we get into tonight. I'm certainly not your lawyer. None of this is legal advice, and all of the allegations we're going to cover are just that. They're allegations and have not been proven in court. Nothing we're going to talk about should be taken as fact, and this is all just opinion and speculation provided for entertainment purposes only. Hey, all scientists! I have just realized because I'm gonna you're gonna feature in tonight. I think I'm gonna pull a quote of yours towards the end. I have realized AU scientist, not our scientist. I kind of thought it might be like autistic scientist, and I realized it could be Australian scientist today. So just how my brain worked. I only just figured that out today. So good to see you. Hi, Melissa Jane. Hi, Crystals, Tiara Tuesday, and hi, Alexandra. Hope you're all doing well tonight. So let's jump in. Okay, so what's been going on this week? We just got like a couple of minutes ago, Jed Wallace updated and dropped his amended complaint. As you can see, it's not yet quite available over here on Pacer, and I'm too cheap to go buy it. So it'll be available probably later tonight. I will probably talk about it on Threads, but we don't get to talk about it right now. But what has happened is Jed has added a new attorney to his party over on the Jed Wallace versus Lively. I don't really have a lot to say about. Everybody's been adding lawyers this week. So we had Jed Wallace adding his. Over on the Stephanie Jones versus Abel, we're going to talk a lot about this tonight, but Stephanie Jones has added Danielle Lazarus to her team as well, and then also added them over on the Blake Lively side as well. On the Blake Lively case, they're representing Jones Works. Hey Marcy Jinx, good to see you. It'd also be alternative universe scientist. Yes, there's many different options, but I have been, like I said, for the past couple of weeks reading it in that way and pronouncing it in that way, and then I was like, oh, actually, I don't know how to pronounce, whether it's AU scientist or scientist or scientist, I don't know. But apologize, you let me know if I get it horrendously wrong. But yes, so they added their like, added that to them. Blake Lively also added Laura Lee Prada and Michael Lambert, who are, I think, attorneys on the Wallace case, to the New York case. And that's likely because as we come up to the hearings over the motions to dismiss and stuff, that with them having knowledge of the Texas case, they'll be able to speak on that and trying to consolidate the Wallace case into New York and making arguments for it. So nothing major there. However, the big thing is that Wayfarer have added their new attorney as well, which is in here. Mitra Ahouraian, I believe is how it's pronounced. Alexandra says Malfoy also made a motion to quash the subpoena. Yes, right here. We'll also talk about that in a couple minutes. But yes, they've added a new attorney, Mitra Ahouraian, to their party over on the Wayfarer side. Now, this is interesting because Mitra is already involved in this case. You already know Mitra. If you remember when Justin was talking about being sent to the basement and he gave us those pictures of him in the basement, right? We've talked about this. This was Wayfarer's plan, right? To stop the cast from boycotting the movie premiere if Baldoni attended. They instead said, well, look, Baldoni's going to show up first. He'll get off the red carpet before Lively and the cast arrived. And then he's taken to this holding area for an hour while they do their red carpet stuff. And then they're sent to their separate screenings. Well, Baldoni shared these pictures, right, of them when that happened, this one and this one. And there's some familiar faces, right? There's Emily Baldoni and his sister, and then Natasha Heath, and then this lady here with the dark hair. She's also in this picture here in the middle, in the dark dress and the dark hair. That is Mitra. See, Mitra is not just an attorney, she's also a long-standing friend of Justin Baldoni, has known them for a number of years. She is also on the board for what used to be the Wayfarer Foundation, and it got changed its name to, you know, the Be Love org, the charitable organization that Justin Baldoni runs that does the Skid Row Carnival of Love, like this once a year event where they provide like services and like a dance, like a street party for homeless people. I think I don't know. It feels very much more like a PR event than it does actually like a charitable organization, and it seems to be like the only thing they do. Is this like once a year big huge PR event? But I don't know. But anyway, she is on the board of Be Love, what we used to be the Wayfarer Foundation. Like you say, see here in 2018. There's also an interview that she gave that talks about it as well. Came down. I'll have to just find it. Let's find Wayfarer. Yeah, she's also on the board of Justin Baldoni's Wayfarer Foundation, and this was back, you know, a couple of years ago, 2021. So she's heavily connected to Wayfarer, and now she's stepping in. She's an entertainment lawyer, and now she's stepping in to represent Wayfarer and all the rest of them. And that's fine. You can do that. There might be questions about conflict of interest there, but I mean, as long as she's, you know, keeping that separate, that's fine. I would be very worried. We talked a couple of times now about Abel and how Abel needs her own representation. I would be very concerned. Like, they keep adding lawyers. The other thing to point out is that Mitra was also raised in the Baha'i faith as well. So you are now starting to be surrounded by all these people who have Wayfarer's best interest at heart, not yours. You know, I think that pressing need for Abel to get her own legal representation separate from Wayfarer's is becoming ever more apparent. Now, whether she has the means to do that, right? You know, if she's under Brian Friedman, then the bills are being paid by Wayfarer and by Steve Sarowitz, so maybe that's part of the reason. But as they continue to add lawyers, especially ones with deep connections to Wayfarer, it's very, very concerning for Abel that she's going to be getting the best representation, right? I don't know how somebody like Mitra would be able to very fairly represent Abel in a conflict with Baldoni and Wayfarer. Now, I don't know if Mitra is representing Abel specifically or whether she's just representing Baldoni and Wayfarer, but definitely something that is another concerning yellow flag in all of this. So that's going on, and then we have the quash for Marvel. Marvel have entered the chats. Before we get to that, though, we'll come back to chat. Sadly, they let him out of the basement. Yeah, he was only down there for an hour. What gets me is, like I said, we talked about how this was always Wayfarer's plan, that he was going to clear the red carpet when Lively was there, and they were going to go to separate screenings. And this was, you know, weeks in advance. If I remember, it was like a month and a half that they came up with this plan. They had plenty of time to create or make a staging area that wasn't him surrounded by bottles of water, or to make sure it was an actual nice holding place. So why Wayfarer didn't go to that, I don't know. I think it's so that then they could take those pictures and do the voicemail and do the whole, oh, woe is me, I'm so sad, I'm in the basement. Anyway, the tax returns were strange. The mission statement was heavily linked to content creation, which is, yes, Master Jigs, yes, the B-Love has been examined over on the Baldoni files. I forget who the Redditor was, but they dug into the financials for it. And this is why I say it's just a little off, because most of their funds tend to go out the door in terms of like catering and event planning, which appears to be Skid Row Carnival of Love. Very little money on anything else. So it doesn't seem like they do a lot of other work outside of this big PR event where they bring cameras and show Justin and, you know, look at all the good that I'm doing, and then they pack up and go home for another 11 months. So again, I just say that based off what we can see from the filings. For all I know, they're doing a ton of good work, and he's this great humanitarian 365. I don't know, right? It always comes back to Baha'i. Yes. Very concerning how it's you know, all the same people. And like I say, Mitra seems to have known the Baldoni family for many years. They're all together. So again, I would be concerned as an outsider if I was in Abel's shoes. Anyway, let's get back to Marvel. Marvel filed this today, a quash for a protective order for non-party confidential agreements. So long and short of it is, right, Wayfarer are trying to subpoena and get discovery on everything related to Nice Pool, right? Because they believe that Nice Pool is this mocking insult of Justin Baldoni, and they believe that it's part of the defamation and smear campaign against him. So they want all of the information about it. Marvel will come back and just basically say, like, look, this is a lot, right? They say here, look, they're saying that by including Nice Pool and Deadpool and Wolverine as a vicious caricature of Baldoni, and that scenes with Nice Pool were intended to be a transparent and mocking portrayal of Baldoni. But they want all documents and communications concerning the creation, development, modification, or portrayal of the character Nice Pool. It also calls for the production of all documents and communications concerning Baldoni. Marvel further understands that from a notice provided by the Reynolds, that the RPs call for Nice Pool related documents from Reynolds as well. So they basically say that, look, this is a huge burden on us. They talk about, first off, the requested documents are neither relevant nor material. They're going after Reynolds for defamation and false light, but as they point out that, in their First Amended complaint, the Wayfarer parties allege that Nice Pool is a caricature and a mocking portrayal of Reynolds. But identify no false statement of fact. So they're saying it's satire, right? It's mockery, it's comedy, it's fun, it's a twisted portrayal. Even if, right, and again, even if, they're not saying that Nice Pool is a portrayal of Baldoni, but they're saying even if it is satire, there's no factual statement being made here about him that would be actionable as defamation, right? So they say the portrayal of Nice Pool is not actionable as defamation. They also talk about, well, in the fact that in their opposition to Reynolds' motion to dismiss, while the Wayfarer parties cite various allegations that support their defamation claim, they forgot to even mention Nice Pool at all as part of that. They argue that the documents are also immaterial, that there are other less burdensome means in which they can obtain the relevant information, and the information is confidential, right? That these documents are pretty broad. And they would, call for, it says here, the production of draft scripts, production notes, and other documents related to the development of the film, and that these are confidential and deserving of protection. They also make the point that these are especially sensitive because it is a character in an ongoing movie franchise across the MCU, and so that heightens Marvel's confidentiality concerns. They also make the point that, as this court has observed, the details of this case have been closely followed in the media. The parties have accused opposing parties of providing private, sensitive, or confidential information to the media in ways that cannot easily be traced. And where confidential information is not disclosed to the media, it may spread by gossip and innuendo. Talking about how, back when we did that phone call about the protective order, both sides are accusing each other of leaking stuff to the press. And Lyman made the point of, like, you're both accusing each other of it. There's a high risk here of stuff being leaked. Marvel are coming in and saying, look, these guys are squabbling and fighting. We're not picking a side. Both are saying that they're leaking. Why would we want to provide sensitive information and documents into this environment, right? Because the risk of, even if it says there, the requested documents are produced at the highest level of confidentiality permitted by the protective order, there remains serious risk that they will be disclosed to the public. So they're saying, look, there's a risk that we produce. So they start saying, well, we should stay and hold off pending determination of the motion to dismiss. So given that these claims are still up in the air, it hasn't been settled yet what actual claims, whether they're going to be dismissed, we're asking for a stay so that we can say, hey, we don't have to produce discovery until you guys figure out whether these defamation claims even survive. Then we'll figure out if we want to actually produce. So think it's fairly well written. I don't know how Lyman's going to go with that. I believe Wayfarer get to come in now and oppose that and say why it's important that they get those documents right now. So we'll see. More with MJ responded to me on Threads and said, I think she said that they have 2 business days, which would give them until Tuesday, Wednesday, I think. So yeah, we'll see what the answer there is. All right, let's go back over to chat. But that would take work. Yes, it would. It would take work, and it would take being consistent and not just getting the praise and adoration, which we've talked about, not really the thing. All right, so most of this week has been continued really kind of the conversation about the subpoena, right? The subpoenas. Oh my goodness, the subpoenas never end. The big thing has been, let me close some of this out. We can get rid of those. You know, the conversation's continuing of like we talked before, they had said, well, Wayfair had filed in their answers over to Jones that there was never a subpoena. Hi, Aris, good to see you. And they've had to change that, right? They've kind of come back and said, well, no, there was a subpoena, but if there was, then this was all completely unlawful. And that's where we kind of left it off last week. As things have shaken out, more people are taking a look at it. It's now becoming clear that this was a lawful end move, right? That there's nothing really particularly illegal about what they did. So instead, the argument has been, well, it's unethical. It's unethical that they did this. And in particular, Freeman seems to object to the idea that because they went around this without notifying Wayfarer and notifying Baldoni specifically, they were able to get their text messages without giving them an opportunity to oppose it, right? If they'd had asked Wayfarer or Baldoni specifically for those texts and directly, they would have had the option and the ability to be able to fight that, to reduce the scope of what they've been asking for, exactly what's there happening with Marvel. And so Freeman's saying, well, they were able to get these documents without having to give us any notice and get them. The problem with this argument, and I talked about this both on Threads and over on Reddit, so if you've already seen this, I apologize, but I thought this was worth just discussing on here quickly. The problem with this is that in Baldoni's own filings, they show a lot of text messages that they have between a conversation between James Vituska of the Daily Mail and Leslie Sloan, right? And they got those text messages after the CRD complaint came out by directly reaching out to James. These are the screenshots from Baldoni's own New York Times original complaint. And you can see here, it's a conversation with Melissa Nathan, James Vituska, and then Brian Friedman as well, where they're asking, it looks like Melissa Nathan's asking, do they have anything with dates? Anything you have is helpful. Thank you, 1,000. Brian says, thanks, Melissa. This is Brian Friedman. I really appreciate it, James. And James says, Brian, it will be easier to send you the screen recording of our conversation, which I scroll through slowly in the conversation. So James is a journalist for the Daily Mail, ends up just turning over all of his conversations with Leslie Sloan over to Melissa Nathan and Friedman without any subpoena, right? So again, in the same way that Lively got those texts, all of the arguments that they've been making now for the last 2 weeks, that they obtained these texts illegally from a third party, that they did so without a subpoena, that they did so without notifying the person whose text messages they're sharing. All of this stuff is true of Leslie Sloan, whose text messages are all over the original New York Times complaint that Wayfarer did. They got those text messages from the journalist. Leslie Sloan was never subpoenaed for those text messages. She was never given notice about them using her text messages, and they never obtained them with her permission. And so it's like everything that they've been arguing for the last 2 weeks turns right back around to them, because the way that they got Leslie Sloan's text messages and are using them throughout their complaint falls to the same problems that they're accusing Lively of, because they did not give Sloan any notice. They did not allow her to reduce the scope of those text messages or any of it. They just got them because they turned them over from a journalist. Also ignore that they straight up lied about the discussion they got them from. Yes. I don't think I'll go into that today, but I posted a thread this week on Threads about it. I will be writing that up on Baldoni Files probably this weekend, the whole actual timeline. Now, I talked about it, I think, in like one of the early episodes of Reading the Receipts, I think episode 3, the smear campaign. I talked about that whole story in the Daily Mail and all of that. I'm going to write it up on Baldoni Files so that then if you don't want to have to sit through like a 2-hour live stream, you can get the details for it. And then again, if you want an even shorter version, it's up on Threads from this week. So our scientist says, yeah, that's different because they got it from one of the parties to the conversation. Yeah, like they didn't need to tell her because the person who had the text messages just turned them over, which is the same for Jones. So how is it any difference? Rules for thee, but not Baldoni, says Marcy Jinx. Yep, 100%. Obi-Wan Kenobi, good to see you. Can we stick him back in the basement with his lawyers? Yeah. All right. And ignore that there wasn't a subpoena and that they aren't verified. Yeah. And this is the huge problem is, all of Baldoni's screenshots are screenshots, right? They're all screenshots, which allows, as we talked about before, him to edit them without any way to verify what's going on in the conversation. You know, there's two versions of the conversation he shows. One in the original New York Times complaint where, you know, Leslie says to James, I'm telling you she's a liar, they're panicking, the whole cast hates him. And then James responds, they want to run something based on this reporting. I want to shut it down, but I need something to shut it down with. I know she's a liar. I just need to get my editor on board because she has three reporters feeding her bullshit from LA. She says, I promise that she is lying. This will not look good for your site. The entire cast I'll have go on record. When it comes to his timeline, however, that response from James disappears entirely, showing that the screenshots that Baldoni is showing on his timeline are edited, manipulated, and doctored. They do not, they're not the same. And then, of course, in his New York Times complaint, do I have it open? Got Blake Lively's. It's got to be in here somewhere. Oh, maybe not opened it just yet. Okay, well, let me close these down and let's bring up Baldoni's New York Times complaint. Because, you know, the other thing is, in his original New York Times complaint, and we talked about this, I think, very early on. This is why I know, like, the page numbers. Like, I know at this point, been through these conversations so many times. He presents the conversation with Sloan and James, and, you know, he says, I'm telling you she's a liar, and then you can see here, I'm telling you she's a liar. So you can see this conversation continues. She says, no, I'm on a plane, this needs to hold, sounds good, I'd like to clean this up. Comes down here, your story's mean, I guess you're in cahoots with Melissa. Carries on, and she says, I know you're friends with Melissa. Yeah, we are. But before that, there's the exchange where he says, it will all turn around, you know better how to flip the script than anyone. She says, please make it turn around. But when we come down here, the next piece, it says, they're liking City, good for you. I know you're friends with Melissa. Yeah, we are. So it's a completely different introduction to the text message saying, I know you're friends with Melissa. Even across the same pages here, it doesn't flow. And you can see here, it's not, she did nothing, it's not, she did nothing. So it's intended to be a continuous conversation here from the beginning all the way through, but it doesn't work because, as you can clearly see, messages have been deleted and edited. I'm also not sure what's going on where, like, the date time is different. Is, you know, it's 9:35, it's 11:33. It appears to be light background versus dark background. It looks like there's a conversation that happens with James and Melissa. You can see here where James sends Melissa, and you can see it just says here, just James. This is a conversation with just James, where he sends Melissa the screenshots and they're in dark mode, even though Melissa seems to be in light mode. Then when they talk to him here, and he says, I'll do a screen recording for you, you can see down here, here's the screenshot recording. And you can see this is in light mode. And then there's another screenshot he sends down here. Again, looks like it's in light mode. So I think this difference between the screenshots, the dark mode screenshots are the ones that he directly sent screenshots to Melissa. And then when they take them from the recording, I think they're in light mode, right? What I don't necessarily know is, are these conversations happening at different times? This one is right after the CRD complaint, around December the 20th. We don't know the dates. They didn't tell us. And it just says yesterday here, which is not helpful. I don't necessarily know when this one is. So, you know, I believe this is also after the CRD complaint, just because he says here, she said the whole cast hates Justin. This has nothing to do with Blake. And now she's saying that Blake was sexually assaulted. Why wouldn't she say anything about that then? So I think this is still right after the CRD complaint, but it's two different conversations. You can tell by the top here because Brian Friedman gets added at some point. But again, it also speaks to the fact that Baldoni is not sharing the full conversations with us. He's not sharing the full context of the conversations. He's showing us pieces, even though he promised transparency, promised to show us every text message. We still don't have that. And with those text messages, you know, being edited, that definitely is concerning as to how reliable that conversation can be. So anyway, yeah, coming back to, you know, again, it just shows that everything they're kind of putting on Lively, it's projection, and it comes right back to them. So even if, you know, Brian Friedman's able to make some sort of successful argument about they should have been notified about the text messages, the same applies to his text messages from Leslie Sloan. And the problem is, while Blake Lively has a bunch of witnesses, her 17 protections, the various meetings, Baldoni doesn't have anything for his defamation claim outside of that conversation with James Vitosco. That's all throughout his filings. He keeps referring to that, and that, the Daily Mail say that, she'd mentioned this. He doesn't have anything else other than that. The only other piece of evidence that he has in his complaint is Ryan Reynolds saying the two Predator comments to WME. So his whole thing about there's a conspiracy between Lively, Reynolds, and Sloan to put out these false stories and defame him collapses because he doesn't have anything other than this conversation with a Daily Mail reporter. So if Blake Lively somehow can't use her text messages, he won't be able to use the Leslie Sloan one. I don't think that's going to happen, especially in a civil case, but it's just worth pointing out and bringing up of how, like we talk about, it's one rule for him, a different rule for Blake Lively. All right, let's see what we got. It's funny that people, Aris says, it's funny that people think he actually viewed the film in the basement and not his own separate theater. Yeah, he viewed it in a theater, and Sony executives were there, and so were Wayfarer's executives, and his friends. In fact, like he had Sony there. Blake Lively had her own separate little party. There were two versions of this document in the original New York Times complaint. Can't remember if the one timeline is just one of those or a third version. The one in the New York Times, in the original New York Times complaint, there's one version. In the, I think the 179 page is his second one. His complaint against Blake Lively in the amended version. It's the edited version where that text message gets cropped out. Complex. The concept of multiplex seems lost on them. Yes, there are multiple screens. Ignore those deleted edited text. They're just meaningless. Trust us, bro. Yes. Master Jake says the alternating horizontal vertical text orientations are so unprofessional too. Oh, I mean, and like, what's weird is a lot of these text messages are really readable in the original New York Times complaint, but by the time you get to the timeline, you can't read anything in them. There's a bunch of places where I've had to like go grab a screenshot, and I'm going back to the original New York Times complaint because I'm like, is there a screenshot of that text message in here? Because it's better resolution here than it is in the timeline. By then it's barely legible. Don't get me started on the ones with dates. They're practically useless. Yeah, exactly. It's insane. But again, this is part of the problem of him using these screenshots and not having actual forensically pulled text messages. Can't trust them, and then they're blurry, illegible. Gosh knows what's in them. Obi-Wan Kenobi says, when his lawyer called these alleged evidence receipts, it was clear it was pending to a specific audience and it wasn't the court. Yeah, and unfortunately it's worked, right? Everybody talks, oh, his receipts. And it's like, his receipts show him planning, plotting, and asking, hey, are we paying this 15 grand for this smear campaign for proactive fan posting, right? Like, we're actually paying people to post on Baldoni's behalf. It's in his, timeline, and yet they're still like, that's a lie. It's all made up by Lively. She's doctoring everything. Don't get me started as the screenshots that they present out of order and it changes the conversation unless you realize. Yeah, I mean, this is the whole August 7th Daily Mail, August 8th Daily Mail conversation, which, like I say, I'll post to to Baldoni files this weekend, because again, it's so hard to piece it together because he deliberately shows it out of order and tries to imply a narrative when the actual reality is it's all over the place. But anyway, all right. So we did talk about all of that stuff. So the big thing this week has been the amended answers to the complaint. So because of this whole thing with the subpoena, of course, the internet and the Baldoni defenders have been salivating at the idea that, Friedman was going to amend his complaints and come after them because of the subpoena, and that they were going to be in serious criminal trouble now, and it spelled the end. And so, of course, it's kind of like, in order to answer to that, they have amended their answers and counterclaims in the Jones versus Abel lawsuit in order to add some of this information about the subpoena. Master Jing says there's a receipt of Nathan saying Jones didn't talk to the Daily Mail. Yes, she says that to Sarah. That's what I point out in that thread that I did this week. Let me just quickly run to it so I can show you. This is the whole, August 6th nonsense. So she's talking here about, Steph Jones is trying to call Sony and the Daily Mail and try and clear her name and all of this stuff. And Leslie Sloan is also calling the Daily Mail, it says there, because Leslie then called Sarah and said the Daily Mail had called her, Leslie, and said Justin's camper blaming Blake. And I know that we haven't said anything to that fact. She might have just fucked us all up here. Sarah needs to run her story ASAP. And Abel says, what? Stop. And so then there's a bunch of screenshots here. And these are the ones that are like super legible. But you can see here it says, why has something looks like Justin's or James calling me? You called Daily Mail. What the fuck are you doing? I think it says, excuse me, but I can't read anything else from there. And then it says something here about like, you know, whenever you get me in, I'll put it in the story or something. And yes, like that's really all you can read out of this. That screenshot there that she looks like she's sending Sarah, her sister, is the email that the Daily Mail had sent to Wayfarer and asking for comment. So she's sharing the screenshots of her conversation with Sarah, and then this is here a little bit later on. She shares another screenshot and it says, not sure when we're putting this up. I assume this is Sarah talking about her story that she's writing for page 6. And Melissa says, there's no way we would do a big story with the Daily Mail. No one even knows we have him, meaning Baldoni. At this point, it wasn't public knowledge that Nathan was representing Baldoni and he'd hired this crisis PR. That news didn't break until I think the 13th or the 14th. Sarah says, she said Stephanie, so maybe Stephanie is involved, and Melissa definitively says she's not. So this whole plan that they have where to blame Stephanie falls apart because she's telling Sarah, Nathan, her sister, that Stephanie isn't involved. So yeah. It's the she's not blue at the bottom. Yep, that's it. It's the only bit we can read in that conversation. So appreciate you guys, appreciate Baldoni and Wayfarer for really giving us the one text message between them that is fully legible is the bit where they actually state that Stephanie is not involved in leaking it to the Daily Mail. And again, they didn't need to do this. Why show us this? Right? You know, this whole I have the worst lawyers. Like, what are you doing? Anyway, so yes, so they've amended their counterclaims. And so we'll go through those. That's what we'll spend most of tonight doing, because they're adding in the subpoena stuff. There's not a huge amount of changes in the actual answers themselves. So I brought up, I think this is Wayfarers, right? We're going to go start through Wayfarers. There is a little bit of a change in here, but nothing major. I did kind of point out that, I think, where is it? It's like 27, something like this. I think it was about 27. No, maybe I got it wrong. One moment. Yeah, so I guess it's not in this one. It's only the producer, not produced. I talked about this in the Abel one. Okay. So he is an actor and director and producer, but he didn't produce the film in this one. All right, so the only thing they really change in their answers is 52. Originally, they just say tag, and they kind of spell out that it's the agency group, and then in brackets tag, so that any future references to tag know what it means. Very small minor change here, nothing big. They do it again here for this one with Heath. Originally, they just said defendant admits Heath sent the quoted email. So they call out that are referring to Jamie Heath, and then in brackets put Heath so that all future references refer to him. Not a big change. That is the only thing that I could see changed in Wayfarer's answers. Everything else is pretty much exactly the same. A scientist says they assumed probably correctly that people wouldn't read the actual messages and just accept the accompanying narrative fairly represent them. Yeah, I mean, they didn't realize just how petty and how much free time I have on my hands right now to be able to just keep going through these documents and do it. And yeah, sadly, I don't have real hobbies or other things to distract me. So that was a bad assumption on their part, I think. They should have realized this is the internet. There is always going to be somebody with far too much time on their hands. And I'm happy to step in that role in this instance. All right, so we get on to the claims. Now, again, in terms of Wayfarer, they, again, don't necessarily change a huge amount. They kind of, I think on this one, number 17, I think I talked about, they added a little bit extra on here. Boom, 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 boom. Bring it up. Yeah. They say the agreement contains a New York law, choice of law provision. So they basically add all of this extra text. Not really a huge deal, doesn't change much. I'm just saying this because, again, I have too much time on my hands. I'm a pedant and I spent a bunch of time going through these documents. And so I'm going to force you to see all of the work that I did. Like, appreciate it. Appreciate the art. Number 40. Okay, so 40 is a bit bigger of a deal. So in number 40, they are talking about exactly what we just talked about, that whole August 8th drama with the Daily Mail, right? And they show these two screenshots originally. And in particular, they show this one from Abel where Abel says, "Team, please ignore." So what happens is, you can see here at 10, it says 10:29, so I don't know what this is whether this is like, because of all these time zones are different, I can't tell whether that's meant to be like 8:29, 9:29, I don't know, right? Because of the timing. So anyway, the original email comes in from the Daily Mail to Jen, Stephanie, and Wayfarer Studios. Sorry, Jennifer. I don't know if she goes by Jen. And Stephanie replies, "I've left word for this reporter. It's Lillian Gisson. It's not hidden. They've kind of revealed. We know who it is from the Daily Mail stories. It's Lillian Gisson. She's been very nice in the past, so we'll get this fixed." Abel also sends a response to that, says, "Team, please ignore." So Lillian is working on two stories at this point. One is the story about, hey, everybody on the internet's kind of noticing that Baldoni and Lively weren't together at the premiere and are speculating, which is specifically the story she's talking about here. She's also working on another story, which is the story she's working on with James Vituska, which is the negative story that supposedly came from Jones blaming Blake Lively for the rift. Obi-Wan Kenobi says your hard work is appreciated. Yes, I appreciate that. It's nice to know that somebody's impressed with me being able to read. You know, it's a hard-fought skill. And they include this text message, this email response where Stephanie then also responds to Abel saying, again, like, "Oh no, she's been nice and fixed first thing in the past. I'll give her a call. This is a nothing burger." It's two different emails. It's two different responses where Stephanie's responding. But the one here is important because it's Jennifer telling, specifically shutting down, "Don't talk to the Daily Mail." And like I say, we know that the Daily Mail were trying to say that Jones had planted the story, and Stephanie Jones and Leslie Sloan talking to the Daily Mail anyway, despite what Abel and Nathan wanted, is what ruins their whole plan, right? So in the amended, they take out that inconvenient screenshot of Abel telling Nathan not to do it, of Jones not to do it, and Jones, doing anything anyway. Because again, part of their whole narrative that they've had to get like indemnity for her as employee is that she was following Jones's orders, and that Jones was being neglectful and wasn't stepping in and managing the account. So a whole email where Abel is telling everybody don't go talk to them, and Stephanie says no, actually I'm going to talk to them, disrupts both of those, right? It disrupts the idea that Abel was just following Jones's direction, because Jones is clearly disagreement with Abel here, and also that she wasn't being proactive and involved in Wayfarer's account, because she very clearly is. So they just scrubbed that because it doesn't look great for them. I think it's pretty telling that they took that one out. They left the other one in. So that's really the only bits. 49 they take out. I go back to the older version. 49 they take out because inconveniently this is the part where they brag on about that Jones shared information with third parties, and in no event pursuant to a subpoena or any kind of lawful order. That entire piece just gets deleted out of here because that's clearly no longer relevant or true anymore. So they just take out that piece. We go to 50. They talk about they're not aware of the magnitude of Jones's betrayal. And that's where they take out these as well. So 51 gets gone on information of belief at a time and turning. And then they come to 54, which is, although they were not yet aware of magnitude of Jones's betrayal. So you can see we go from as September draws near to although Wayfarer and Baldoni, as September draws near, although Wayfarer and Baldoni. So they get rid of all of this, right? They get rid of Jones voluntarily reached out to Lively's team offering what she believed to be ammunition. So all of this was wrong. This was all speculation and imagined by Wayfarer's team. So them taking this out is them having to admit they got this wrong. They're talking about then, Lively was licking her wounds after World publicized a series of missteps. On information and belief, Jones believed it was ultimately correct that Lively and her team would be willing participants in her scheme. Well, now we know that it was Lively who reached out to Jones, not the other way around. So their whole narrative here was completely way off. As I'm going to talk about later, I think this is really damaging for them because it shows just how much of these complaints Wayfarer are just guessing. They have no clue what they're claiming. In turning these materials over to Lively, Jones knew full well the blowback would engulf not only Abel and Nathan, but also current Joneswood clients, Wayfarer and Baldoni. On information and belief, that was precisely the goal. Well, they know now that those materials were turned over long after they were no longer clients, right? They got turned over in October, and Wayfarer terminated their agreement, I believe, in late August. So, yeah. Obi-Wan Kenobi says, receipts more like deceits. Ho, ho, ho. That's a good one. We need to pin that one, put that one somewhere. All Sanchez says, they don't realize some people have attention spans longer than a goldfish and can remember what they previously read. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing with me is, I got that reputation for being the dude with the receipts, and this is kind of my jam, right? Kind of going through and making sure that all of the receipts line up and agree. I don't know if there is like a paying way of this, a job out of this at the end of this, but like I would love this. This is a career. Maybe I should have got into law, right? I think I would have done well. But anyway, come back to 52. Here now they just assert that they consider Jones's behavior to be a material breach of the agreement. Now, remember in Jones's motion to dismiss, I think we talked about last week, Jones has kind of picked up on them talking about this piece here, where it says, although they did not yet know just how far Jones had taken things, Wayfarer and Baldoni considered her behavior to be a material breach of the agreement. Jones's response to that was, hey, they terminated the agreement, but they themselves admit they didn't know everything about Jones's behavior. So how can they claim that her behavior was a material breach of the agreement when they're also admitting that they didn't know the extent of what she had done? So you can't have it both ways. If there was a material breach of the agreement, what was it and what was the behavior? They're trying to argue, well, we didn't really know at the time, but we terminated the agreement. But if you terminated the agreement without just cause, that's the problem. And so they've cleaned that up to get rid of that and to just definitively say, they did consider her behavior to be a material breach of the agreement, and so terminated the agreement. Again, they don't get into specifics into what and how, but they are just cleaning up that language very clearly in response to what Jones has suggested in the motion to dismiss. So, Obi-Wan Kenobi says, his timeline was probably the dumbest thing he ever did. He pinned himself down, yet contradicts himself constantly. Yeah, I mean, I know that everybody's kind of getting it dismissed because it's improper pleading, because they can't really argue against it, right? They can't respond to it with their answers and say whether they admit to, or deny those allegations. I think it's the best thing they ever put out on terms of like the Baldoni side, because there's so much in there where they openly admit to things that we would not have known about, right? The constant meetings that Blake Lively had. We know that there were way more meetings than we talked about originally, right? What we knew originally was like there was a couple of mentions of things, and then in November, what we found out from the timeline was just how bad things have got, right? I'm going to bring up my calendar again, right? All of these red dots, right? All of these incidents where somebody makes a complaint to either Baldoni or Wayfarer, whether it's Blake Lively or another cast member or Sony, right? It was pretty troubled before it got shut down, right? Almost half the days there was some sort of formal complaint about Baldoni's behavior by somebody. That's ridiculous. But we wouldn't have known that without his timeline. So why they ever put that out, I don't know. Somebody on his legal team hates him. But I think this is, like the difference between the two legal strategies. Friedman is more than happy to keep talking endlessly to the press, whereas Lively's legal team is very quiet. They're keeping her quiet. That is not out of fear. That is not out of guilt. That is simply out of the less ammunition they have, the better. And it's smart. He should have done the same, but he's not smart enough. So from 53 onwards, this is all new. So we'll go through some of this. I'm not going to read through all of it, but we'll go through it. This is all of the new stuff that they've added into. So during this point, Jones was stewing in anger and resentment at Wayfarer, Baldoni, and above all, Abel, and she devised a plan to take revenge on all of them through the theft and dissemination of Abel's private communications with individuals in the Wayfarer circuit. Abel was frog marched. Now she didn't just leave, now she's being frog marched out of Jones Works' LA office. Jones's chief of staff and Jones's Works attorney as Jones's direction confiscated Abel's phone and duped her into disclosing the passcode on the false pretense that Jones Works needed it to facilitate the transfer of Abel's personal number off the Jones Works phone plan. But that is not what they did. Instead, without Abel's consent or authorization, Jones and Jones Works accessed, copied, and monitored Abel's private communications, including your text messages and personal emails, bypassing password protection that would have otherwise barred access to the use of Abel's passcode. Now, I'm not a iPhone user. So there's a bunch of this stuff that I, as a technical person, should probably know the answers to. I don't, because I don't use iPhone. But I think they're just talking about the general phone's passcode here, right? To access it, which if it's a work device, she needs to provide. Help me out, chat. Are you iPhone users? Is this passcode different than just the code to access the phone? I don't know. Jed Wallace's amended complaint is now available to read. I skimmed it and saw Blake Lively visits Texas constantly. I don't know what the context is, but okay. So Alexandra, they're trying to make the complaint, the argument on Wallace's case, that the venue is appropriate in Texas, not in New York and California. And so by saying that she visits Texas often, I guess they're trying to say that, you know, her mainstay of business or her interest is in Texas. And so they can try their case between Lively and Wallace in Texas. They did that in the original complaint and talked about the fact that she was there for a simple plan, a simple favor. Sorry, not a simple plan. For the a simple favor premiere at South by Southwest in Austin, and tried to use that as like, see, she goes to Texas for work, and you're like, that doesn't quite work. I think Wallace's case is pretty likely to get consolidated, but I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I will not be surprised if I'm wrong on that either. So Marcy Jinx says, yes, you are correct. Alsansi says you're correct. Marcy Jinx says, yeah, it's the password to open the phone. So yeah, I mean, it's a Jones Works device. This is ridiculous. Anyway, Jones was quickly sets out to exploit the data she had unlawfully stolen. Again, it's on a work device. She owns all of the data. There is nothing stolen from her, from Abel's phone. Jones disclosed at least some of Abel's private communications to the Lively parties no later than August 21st. So again, notice how the story's changing. Originally, they had turned over everything on the August 21st. They're now trying to change it and say, well, some of it changed. And this is all because Melissa Nathan has said that Leslie Sloan called her to say that I had seen the messages and you're going to get sued. I think it's in his timeline. For August 21st. Yeah, here we go. On the same day that Abel's phone is seized, Stephanie Jones, Nathan receives a call from Leslie Sloan, Lively's publicist, telling her she has seen her text and will be sued. And they show that there's a call log. They get Sloan's name wrong, but they show a call log for 3 minutes on August 21st, saying that she'd called them. So they're stating that, and so based off that, they're saying there must have been some sort of disclosure. But again, they don't know the details. They don't know what. They don't know how much. Their story is also different in Abel's answer, and I'll show you that when we get to it. But here they're saying, no, well, they must have disclosed at least some of the private communications for her to be able to make that call. These communications were drawn largely from iCloud, which is accessible through the confiscated iPhone. This is a big part of their legal argument they're going to make, is that the messages aren't on the device themselves, they're on iCloud. And again, I don't necessarily know how this is different in iPhone versus Android. I know that on Android, yes, some of your messages are stored up in the cloud, but they're also on the device. And that distinction could end up being really important, could end up being not being. But the way that they're going with their argument, they're trying to argue that all of the data lived in the cloud, which is going to open Jones up to being unauthorized to access that information. I don't know. We'll get into some of that stuff. Again, this is where like I have to tap out because it's law, right? And we'll see. Anyway, upon information and belief, Jones falsely told Sloan that Wayfarer, along with Abel and Nathan, had orchestrated a malicious smear campaign to destroy Lively's reputation. So they're trying to keep pushing this idea that it was Jones who told Sloan this, that they were doing this smear campaign. Not necessarily all of their text messages where they say, hey, we need a plan to go after Lively. What's my plan? I feel better if I have a plan, which was what Justin had said to Abel back in May. Hey, I just need a plan in case she unfollows me on social media as well. They bring on Nathan. They have a plan. The plan is to, quote, bury her and destroy her. And then they enact the plan, say, hey, here's 15 grand for the plan. Make sure we do proactive fan posting and social media manipulation. And yet they're saying that, well, no. The only reason Lively believed this was because Jones painted a false story. It's not our damning text messages where we openly admit that we're planning to want to do this, destroy her. We're paying for it, and then we're celebrating the fact that, you know, the narrative has shifted thanks to the efforts of Jed and his team. Like, it's crazy to me. And again, they don't have anything from Jones stating that, where Jones is telling them, like, oh, they're doing this smear campaign. Jones knew that this was false, as she was not only aware that Lively had not actually been sexually harassed on set, she knew that there had not been a smear campaign. This is because Jones was copied on many of Wayfarer's emails and text threads during the relevant period and knew full well that Wayfarer was scarcely engaging with the press at all in August. We're going to pause there for a second. I'm going to come to chat and then we'll go into this. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Just sounded funny out of context. No, I mean, it's very silly. I mean, it was silly in Wallace's original complaint where he tried to say, like, well, you know, she came down to South by Southwest, so therefore the venue should be Texas. Like, no. They're reaching. Alsciences says, so far we've only seen professional messages and emails. Yep, all of this stuff is conducted for work, on behalf of work, the work she was doing. None of it is about her, you know, doctor's appointments or her hanging out with friends or whatever. So this is going to, I think, be a part of their case. But we'll see. We'll see how this goes. Alsciences also says if they were sent from that device, they were on the phone and backed up to the cloud. And that's... I did a little bit of digging. We'll talk that, like, at the end when I get into that. There's a lot of gray area around this. I do actually think the stuff that they're going for in Abel's is probably, like, you're gonna be surprised, like some actual smart lawyering from them, because I do think this is a big legal gray area where there aren't necessarily a lot of definite lines that I think they might be able to compete in. They might actually be able to mix things up and go in here, and there's enough room for them to get an actionable complaint out of this that makes it to trial because of some of that gray area. What I don't know is how much it's a work device is going to factor into that and prevent it from going any further than that. We'll see, I guess, in the motions to dismiss. Obi-Wan Kenobi says, if the account belonged to the company, was paid for by the company, iCloud information belongs to the company. When we get to Abel's, we'll talk about that. But yes, that is the other piece that's going to come up is, was this really Abel's personal account or was it Abel's work account that the iCloud is under? Because that changes things dramatically. All right. So yes, they say that Wayfarer was scarcely engaging with the press at all. Pause. When I read that, I laughed out loud because I'm like, I've been through all of these documents a lot, and I'm like, August was a really busy month for Wayfarer and Jennifer Abel and Melissa Nathan. To boldly state that you were scarcely engaging with the press at all is a big deal. And I will probably take this portion of the live stream and write this up as another thread on the Baldoni files, because I think this deserves calling out. So let's go take a look at what happened in August. Were they scarcely engaging with the press? What do you think, chat? Let me know. So first off, right, we're going to go over to Jones's complaint. Again, we've got the answers now at this point from Wayfarer and Jennifer Abel and Melissa Nathan. They've admitted to a lot of the text messages. So when we talk and show some of these text messages, I'm going to do for probably the next 5 minutes, because they scarcely talk to anybody in August. As we go through all these text messages, realize a lot of them have been answered and they've said, yes, that text message is accurate. I did send that, right? So there isn't a case of like, these are text messages are fake or they didn't come up. We know at this point that they have said, yes, we sent those text messages on those dates and they said those things. Bearing that in mind, let's go. So July 29th, they are talking with, I believe it's Katie Warren over at the Business Insider to do the article, the hit piece on Stephanie Jones, um, the negative article about her, and they're working with it. So they work with Katie from July 29th through the rest of July, all the way through August. She's talking here, say, should I get Justin's letter removed from the Business Insider article? I would need to tell Katie on background that both Justin and Wayfair have severed ties. I'm not sure if your lawyers would recommend that, but she would need to print that. I'm not sure if that would cause issues. So again, when they're talking about we had this material breach and we terminated contract. Abel's here talking about, hey, we're trying to terminate our contract in the 9th of August before any of that happened. So it really undermines their case there that it was the breach on the 21st that caused them to terminate, because they were discussing terminating on the 9th and telling Business Insider. And then on the 12th, hey, would you mind calling me back when you have a minute? Just a quick question. They're discussing again, there's a kill story about you, and then the story's up on the 15th, where Katie thanks Abel. So from the 29th through the 15th, they're constantly talking to the Business Insider about that article. That's one, right? All right, Blake Lively's CRD complaint. August the 1st, Abel talks to Heath about, hey, I'm going out to dinner with a friend of mine who writes for People, Fox News, fully briefing her of the situation, ready to take the story of Blake weaponizing feminism to any of her outlets. Obi-Wan Kenobi says, depending on what the word scarcely means, it apparently has a very different meaning in Wayfarer's circles than what I'm about to show. So, August the 1st, they're talking to another member of the press who works for People, Fox News, briefing them, getting them ready to go after Blake Lively. Okay. August the 4th. Oh, I guess I gotta just go to editor because I didn't write the page down. August the 4th. They talk about, I've already spoken off the record to the Daily Mail's editor because she's my friend. She's ready when we are. So August the 4th, they were talking to the Daily Mail. All right, let's go over to Baldoni's timeline. So what we at? We're at 3? We're at 3 different people right now. Okay. I guess 16th. This whole saga on August the 8th, don't forget that it starts out where, before they enact the combat plan, Nathan is bragging to Abel that she has friends at TMZ who are giving her tips. Justin Baldoni tips hitting her email about his beef with Blake and Colleen Hoover. So August the 8th, they're also chatting and got the inside scoop with TMZ. Come down to the 8th. For later on the 8th, they're talking with the Independent. Then, of course, all of the stuff on the August the 8th. This is Sloan. But the Daily Mail reaches out to them and they talk to the Daily Mail. Stephanie Jones gets shut down because they want Melissa Nathan handling it. It says here, Jamie Owentera was like, I know her, I'll handle it, and she to kill it. Jamie told her to stand down because you're handling. Melissa Nathan's handling. So Nathan is talking to the Daily Mail. She also points out here that she's getting Leslie's screenshots. So this conversation that she's having with James Vituska, Nathan is here bragging to Abel on the 8th that she's getting the screenshots from Leslie Sloan having a conversation with the journalist. So she's getting them in real time. She's getting fed information again from a different Daily Mail reporter, not the editor. So we're at like, I've lost count now, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 different people, right? I think that she also then is talking obviously here to her sister Sarah Nathan over at the New York Post. That's like 8. We go through that whole saga. This is James Vituska and Lillian Gisson's article talking here about, I can tell you've done a lot of work, nothing about being unsafe, at sexual comments. So she was also shaping the article with Jane Vituska and Lillian Gisson. And she says, yeah, I did a lot of this stuff. They also then talk about Sarah Nathan's article here, page 6, was driving sorry. I knew that she would keep uncomfortable. She tried to shape that article as well and get stuff taken out of it. And then she says here, I can't talk to any more journalists today. So scarcely means that the point that you cannot talk to any more journalists. That's what scarcely means, where you are just so tired from spending your entire day talking to journalists and you are exhausted from talking to journalists. I can't talk to any more journalists today. Right here, right here. Zip. Well, that just makes it look terrible. But you get the idea. Keep going. So where are we? 137. So we keep going down because we're only a couple of days. A couple of days later, 135, 6, 7. The New York Post contacts Nathan for a comment. They don't have the right story about the studio cut. Rather, Lively had the Wayfair and Stoney shared a studio cut. So they're talking here about, that they've got the story wrong. It wasn't that Lively did a more feminine edit. We're going to have to change the wording. She says, I'm on a Zoom call, but Sarah, but call Sarah and go through it. So they're talking again about editing and shaping another article with Sarah Nathan on the 12th as well. So another article that they were talking about in August. Then that comes out, and then I think Lively has one more on the 51st. Yeah. So this is when Baldoni suggests, hey, Steve Sarowitz says, can we flip the narrative from the leak this morning to about Ryan saying the script was a disaster? Nathan assured Baldoni that this is an easy flip before indicating she was working on a story for Variety that would achieve this goal. And again, in Abel's answers, she admits that yes, that was the communication that she shared with Baldoni. So they're also talking to Variety as well in August. This is August the 15th. So, I mean, we're only halfway through the month, and we've got like at least a dozen, if not more, different stories and people that they are talking to and working with in just the first half of the month. I don't know what version of the word scarce fits this definition. Sorry if I seem frustrated, but yeah, I mean, I laughed when they talked about that. James has completely trashed his professional relationship with Sloan. Yeah, he's still writing for the Daily Mail though. They don't care. So, I mean, nobody's shocked there about the journalistic integrity of the Daily Mail being less than we might imagine. But yeah, he's still writing for the Daily Mail. But they didn't plant any stories. Yes, they didn't. They didn't plant any stories. They were just constantly talking to journalists, shaping stories. Do they seriously think we believe they were talking about Baldoni? Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. It's very hard to say that they were only talking about Baldoni when there's, especially that whole one with the stuff in Lively's complaint that she shows, where she's talking about, hey, we planted this with the editor. She's ready to go when we are. Like, you're clearly planning a hit piece, and the same with the Fox News person as well, right? Like, this story of Blake weaponizing feminism to any of her outlets, like this idea you weren't planting stories. And then again, August the 8th, no matter who you believe, right? Whether Nathan planted the story with the Daily Mail or Jones planted the story with the Daily Mail, Baldoni's team planted a negative story about Blake Lively on August the 8th. So it's a point of fact they posted stories, and Baldoni's own timeline admits it. How we're still having this conversation that she's making this up, I don't understand. It's frustrating. How do you make a story about Ryan by talking about Baldoni? Yeah, I don't know. I'd never even heard of him until the lawsuit. I had, and I'll be honest, I didn't have the best feelings about him, and it was just there's an old video I stitched on TikTok where he was talking with Kylie Cresta, and I felt like he'd missed the point. And I just, you feel like, oh, he didn't get the deeper point. And now having like had people tag me and talk to me about like some of the Man Enough podcasts, which I had never listened to, going back and listening to some of that now and seeing his talk, I'm like, oh, this is a pattern, right? Like this is a pattern. He doesn't get it. And I'm slowly working on my whole video about that and about performative male feminists and about this idea that you read a book and his whole like women are human like never went any deeper than that, and I think it's just part of that. Like the flags were there, but I think the issue is we live in a world that is so desperate for good male role models and somebody who is positive. We're so tired of the toxicity that we lift up and celebrate anybody who is even remotely kind of turning away from it and pushing in the right direction. And it's something I feel very conflicted about, right? Because obviously a large part of my platform is due to that. I wouldn't have one. I wouldn't have an audience without that behavior and that mechanism. But I also think, like, again, like, I accept it's incredibly dangerous because it lifts up men, and there's a lot of, like, whenever somebody gets outed, whenever there's a Robbie Harvey, a Justin Baldoni, they've always had like 20 million different chances that people had overlooked because they're being so generous. So I guess, I don't know. All I would say is, if you see red flags, please DM me, please tell me, please call me out. Don't let it slide because you're worried that, like, oh, we don't want to take another one down. Like, give me the feedback, please. Don't let me go years from now and then there's like, oh well, I always said he was terrible. I got suspicious when he didn't defend Blake despite being a feminist while Brandon did. 100%. That alone, right? And not only that, didn't do it then, hasn't done it now, didn't go since. And and we talked about this, I think, like last week or the week before on stream, when he did defend and say, hey, we need to cut it out, he only did it in the context of his side had been attacked, his side had been harassed and bullied, and that no one should go through what they're going through. No one should go through what Blake Lively or Jenny Slate or Colleen Hoover or anybody who's connected to Blake Lively. And the point that they, got the health inspector called on the donut shop, like, and you're affecting a small business, like, come on, man. Like, you should have said something. It's cowardice. It's cowardice. A decent guy give him a medal, half serious, half joke. No, I mean, 100 is, but like, I think we have to come to terms with that of the fact we are so eager, right? We're so desperate for men who are not giant pieces of crap, that we're willing to celebrate anything. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard. All right. Let's keep going. All right, so there was all of that, and then I think, what was it, 58? They're talking here, in turning over these materials to Lively, they knew that they could slice, dice, cherry pick, massage, and in some cases outright alter. Right? Again, this makes me so mad, because who you talking about altering text messages? Like, are you kidding me? Oh, that's what they're doing. Like, I can't wait for that to get called out. The fact that they have edited their text messages and they don't look like them once they actually get turned over forensically and they get them in discovery, because so frustrating. Anyway, they continue discussions with lively parties over the subsequent months. How does he know? He doesn't even know any of the conversations. So how can he say that they did over the subsequent months? Based on what information? He's got nothing. He doesn't put anything in here. And again, given that so much of his First Amendment got kicked out, I don't know how he gets to say that, but we'll talk more about that in the Abel one. For different reasons, the lively parties on the one hand and Jonesworks on the other needed to create a veneer of legitimacy. Here is where we go so far off the rails. Now he's arguing, right, a theory that came from the internet. I don't know if it came from Reddit essentially, or if it came from the creators on like TikTok and Instagram. But on information and belief, the lively parties anticipated or were told directly that the New York Times would not traffic in stolen communications under these circumstances and needed the color of law. Jones and Jonesworks, for their part, wanted to insulate themselves from legal exposure to Wayfair for breaches of confidentiality. Accordingly, on September the 27th, working hand in glove with Jones and Jonesworks, the lively parties and their counsel initiated a sham legal proceeding in New York State Court, which is the legal lawsuit we talked about last week. And the lawsuit was nothing more than a transparent ploy to obtain subpoena power. The plaintiff, Van Zandt Inc., is an inactive corporate entity affiliated with Lively and Reynolds. It's not inactive. We talked about this last week. The New York one is separate from the Delaware and California one that is inactive. And if they had pulled the New York incorporation documents, they would probably see that. I'm guessing, because I haven't pulled them yet myself. I need to do that this week. But I think the moment that we pull those, you'll see that they are registered on the New York one. Anyway, and entirely unrelated to the film or Wayfarer parties, the lawsuit asserts three causes of action: a breach of contract, a breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing, and the faithless servant against Doe defendants only. The lawsuit does not explain how or why Van Zandt was unable to identify the proper defendants, especially in the light of a breach of contract action. I think that's actually a reasonably good question, because if they're arguing breach of contract, then they should have some sense of what contract, and if they do, then who breached it. They implausibly claimed they didn't know the identities so that they could rely on generalized recitations of boilerplate legal jargon. Hold this thought for me, because this is another one of those foreshadowing that we're going to get to at the end of the live stream, about an hour. They're arguing that, oh, they're just throwing out boilerplate legal jargon in order to get this lawsuit. Anyway, Van Zandt never requested the assignment of a judge, so this is also another piece that came up, that they didn't actually need it to be signed by a court or the judge, and so that's why the copy that the Daily Mail got doesn't actually have a stamp from the judge or from a court on it, is because totally valid legal procedure, they didn't need to, which is, again, learning so much about law. They didn't substitute the Doe defendants for named parties or serve the complainant and the defendant. The only docket entries are the complaint and then the motion to dismiss. And then she filed her CRD complaint. So again, he's arguing here she didn't turn it into a full actual lawsuit with the named defendants, but she did. She just filed it with a different court. And I have said, and I think this is what happened, they assumed about the smear campaign, right? Because they already had a sense of it, given the apology that was demanded on the 12th. August the 12th is when Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds asked them to give out the public statement apologizing for a troubled production. So this idea that, oh, they came up with the smear campaign afterwards is BS, because they already had this idea that Wayfarer were engaging in the smear campaign August the 12th, which is why they asked them to put this out. So his whole story that he's inventing here, that they kind of came up with this idea to manipulate and create and defame them under the smear campaign, is BS, because they'd already had this sense of the Wayfarer were involved in a smear campaign weeks before, or at least a week and 2 days before they got the text messages. Anyway, I think they knew about the smear campaign. It was only once they got the text messages they realized that it was in direct retaliation for the fear of the sexual harassment allegations coming out, which then flips things, because this is no longer just defamation. This is now retaliation, and it's workplace retaliation for sexual harassment, which flips things, which is why then it got filed as a CRD complaint, because then they needed to go after them under employment law. Anyway, I don't think they have to allege anything in a subpoena unless a judge asks after the recipient fights it. Yeah, I don't know, but that sounds about right, junk phone. All right, so they go through, they talk about the sham subpoena, they turned over the contents of Abel's phone and cloud store communications for a second time. So they're alleging that it already happened in August, but again, they don't have any proof of it, and that this whole thing was just to create a veneer of legitimacy and plausible deniability once the New York Times came through for Lively. They don't have any proof that the New York Times was working with Lively back in October. Again, the only thing they have is they're relying on the JavaScript folder names, which, I mean, the moment they get an IT guy from the New York Times under deposition, is going to collapse. But I could be wrong. Maybe Wayfarer have been right from the start. That they worked on an article for 2 months, maybe. I don't know. On information and belief, the entire affair was orchestrated by the Lively parties to fly under the radar and enable them to paper over their unlawful conduct. So they talk about now they've been seriously harmed by it, that Wayfarer and Baldoni have become public objects of scorn and derision. Baldoni wrongfully labeled as a sex pest. His accolades have been tarnished and his future projects thrown into doubt. R.I.P. Pac-Man. The same true of Wayfarer, which has been falsely cast as an enabler of sexual misconduct and the architect of a vicious retaliation campaign against a victim of such misconduct. Indeed, its very viability as a studio has been thrown into doubt as a direct result of Jones' actions on behalf of Jones Works, which is really what this is all about, right? Is that Sarowitz had intended Wayfarer to be a vehicle for not just Baldoni, but also for the Baha'i faith to really kind of launch them, and that, Baldoni was the Baha'i Tom Cruise, and all of this has really just scuppered that and really thrown into doubt Wayfarer's viability as a studio going forward. And that's a big deal, because that entire plan has now been thrown out, which is why they're going so hard after Lively, when they could have just put out a public apology, talked about how it's important that everybody feels safe on set, really kind of committed to the things he talks about on his platform, and nobody would have really cared, and everybody could have moved on. The other thing now, though, that's important is they've changed now their causes of action. So let's just quickly go through what they've changed here. So their first cause of action is breach of contract. That, you know, they originally were going after because of disclosing confidential information. They're still kind of going after that the same. Their second cause, however, is now another breach of contract for not behaving in a professional manner according with the goals. Originally, they were going after breach of implied covenant faith. This has now got bumped down to cause of action number 3. Fourth cause is defamation per se, which they did not have originally. So they've added in that by Jones saying that they orchestrated a quote smear campaign, it's defamation. And talking about they had false statements to Wayfarer about Wayfarer to third parties. Again, these have never been identified in the motions to dismiss. Jones was pretty clear about, hey, they cannot actually specify any of these statements or talk about who they are. They weren't even able to answer the interrogatories, stating, you know, like who has said what for Leslie Sloan. I don't think they're going to have any better luck with that here in Jones because, again, they don't have any specificity, and I think it's because they don't actually have any real claims here. All right, so that's really they've had to add on here. They really thought they could muscle in on Scientology's turf. I don't necessarily think they wanted to nestle in on their turf. I do think they thought, hey, that looks like a good business plan. And I'll be honest, I don't fault them, right? Like they make a lot of money. So I can definitely see that they were like, okay, this is the way to go. I'm pretty sure, says the Junk Farm, you cannot have a right to privacy for illegal acts. Yeah, again, definitely. I don't believe you can, and I think that's going to come into a lot of like Abel stuff. Alexander says, say what you want about Blake and Ryan, but you got to respect they're private and protective of their kids. 100%. And I think like they've a couple of times gone after like journalists who printed pictures like pretty aggressively as well. So good on them. Scientist says, not even a basic fact check. How lazy are they? And I think this is what the problem with a lot of like the lawyering that I'm seeing, right? It's like, I'm not a liar. I shouldn't be able to see this stuff, right? This should be stuff where we look at this and we kind of shrug our shoulders and go, okay, we're going to see that in some of the Abel stuff later on, right? I'm going to just throw my hands up and say, I don't know, because this is good legal stuff. That's how most of this should be. It shouldn't be so obvious where they're saying like, we scarcely talk to the media, and then their own timeline shows them talking to like 15 different media outlets in the first 15 days. Like, that's not scarcely. It's wild. Hi Heidi the Sausage, good to see you. Yeah, but Scientology would see it that way, which just seems so silly. I mean, I would not pick a fight with Scientology. No. It's like, no thanks. No. No, I don't need that Mission Impossible money coming from me. Nope. All right. Again, there's not huge changes in Abel's complaint from the original. One of the ones that they do change, I don't know if I can see it here. I don't know where I had it. Oh, it's here. They declare it ends with us, and then they change it to it ends with us, the film, so they can refer to it later. I mean, it's a small, minor thing. It's not really a big deal. The only one that does that's like a decent change here is we get on to 96. This is the only one that I could see that like was an actual change in the answer. So we go to 96, and this is why I say the iCloud stuff might come up and be important later on. We go to 96. Originally, they say full on deny. Let me bring up Jones's original complaint. I closed it, but let's bring it back up so we can actually see what we're talking about here. Let's do 96. Nope. You're going to give me 96? No, you're not. I got to go scroll to it. 96. Bear with me. All right, 96. At least as early as July, Abel had a new email account, Jennifer at RWA Communications, to which she forwarded dozens of proprietary messages from JonesWorks, including client information, JonesWorks product, and information specifically regarding JonesWorks work for Wayfarer and Baldoni. Abel successfully hid her theft of confidential documents and information. Abel's surreptitiously continued stealing documents and client information while also secretly contacting Jones Works clients to pave the way for her departure. Junkfam says they also lied to, oh, so Messaging says there were no complaints. Also, here's us being told about the complaints, having meetings about the complaints, signing contracts about the complaints, but yeah, no complaints. Yeah, it's wild that they include all of that stuff in there. The junk farm says they also lied to the media that has heard them in this case. They told TMZ not an intervention and no harassment. Abel says there were 2 harassment claims and a cease and desist. Yep, it's all over the place. And again, like I don't know how if you're reading, whenever we get this, like the whole thing that started this, you haven't read the documents. Like we have read the documents and we've read the documents and they're wildly inconsistent. Wayfarer have not stuck with their story, right? They changed whether who it was that Ryan Reynolds talked to at the premiere of Deadpool and Wolverine. And originally it was Baldoni's agent. Then they changed it to a WME executive. There were no complaints, and then they're showing them talking about the complaints. You know, they were surprised by the items that were in the 17 points, and they'd never heard of them before November. And yet the legal letter from Lively's lawyers was like, you need to agree to these going forward, otherwise we're taking legal action based on, you know, the behaviors that have been at this point well communicated, right? Not just by Lively, who'd had multiple meetings on, what was it, May 16th, May 16th, like talked to him on the 25th, the 23rd, the June 1st meeting, like all of this stuff. Like they've consistently not told the whole story. And then every time their story changes, they're like, well, and like this whole thing where they're like, oh, there was never a subpoena. Well, okay, there was a subpoena. It was an unlawful subpoena. Okay, it was a lawful subpoena, but it was an unethical subpoena. Like they are constantly shifting their story. Lively's not doing that. Only they're doing that. Here's the irony. Baldoni has made Lively's name in associations better known than any previous propaganda. Honestly, the blood must be boiling with her getting like the Times 100 and constantly doing stuff and having these other movies and having to see that it has very little effect and impact on the work that she's doing and the people she's working with who are like, yeah, this guy is terrible. It must be really frustrating given that, you know, they're seeing their projects cancelled. So yeah, no worries. All right, so this is what she's saying originally, that she created this Jennifer at RWA Communications. Originally, she just flat out denied the whole allegations in that paragraph. She's updated it now to say, well, actually, I did make that email account, but I deny everything else. So I deny shifting all of the information off it and stealing work stuff. So slight change, but that's the only bit that has changed in here. All right, coming down now into her counter allegations. I think most of this is still the same. There's little bits that are different. I think 25 to 26 is where we start to get different. So let's come down. Oh no. So there is a lot of difference in that originally they talk about her employee contract that is in here. And I think, yeah, they don't really do that in this version of it. They don't really show a lot of that because they're taking out all of the employee stuff basically. Counter 26. So our story kind of talks about, all right, she's adding in, look, because I have a job that requires mobile phone usage, this is a new piece. Public relations firms often assume the cost of their employees' phones. JonesWorks was no exception. While Abel had an Android, Jones offered to switch her to a JonesWorks issued iPhone, which required she port her existing longtime phone number to JonesWorks. Abel had no problem with this as long as she could retain ownership of her phone number and bring it with her when she leaves JonesWorks. Remember, this is part of the whole story, right? She doesn't release the phone number. So they're kind of including in the setup that this would always been promised to her, that she would instantly get her number back. All scientist says, give him a break. It's hard to keep your story straight when you make it up in real time. Remember how at the very, very beginning of this, I freaking called it and said, like, this is abusive behavior. Like, watch it. This is what we do. This whole thing of where you're constructing your story in flight and it's constantly changing is another huge red flag. And yet again, like, it just gets ignored. But like, I feel a little smug, right? That I was like, I called this at the beginning. Anyway, there's a lot of this that is actually very familiar to me. I haven't really talked a lot about like my story, but one of the things of where I got to the end of my story was I also found out a bunch of text messages and stuff, and finding out that my abusive partner was lying to me and hadn't told me the truth and was doing these things. And I'd found it because you know, they had, you know, left all of their computer information out there. Uh, as we're going to see in the Abel stuff, I was also told that I had, you know, illegally unauthorized access to her computer, and that you know, that was going to be a problem for me, and that there were going to be criminal charges and things like that. Never happened, but um, it just it's very interesting to me how these patterns repeat with like completely different stories with completely different people, but the same behaviors. Um, I don't want to read too much into like my story into this, but like, my goodness, it's definitely interesting when you're like, huh, yeah, yeah, this is a pattern I recognize. But anyway, they talk about her longtime phone number to Jones Works company plan. Abel had no problem with this as long as she retained ownership of the phone number and she could leave Jones Works. Although Jones Works owned the physical device, we're admitting that, it was configured with Abel's personal Apple ID, is what they're saying, and populated with all of her personal emails, photos, Apple text message, and third-party apps. Abel had no concerns about using her Jones Works issued cell phone freely as her sole mobile device, as such practices are common in an industry where pay can be low. Remember, we've already got um, uh, Abel's salary, and we know that I believe she was on $125,000. And I realized that, like, you know, in California, that is a very different standard of living than anywhere else. You know, maybe in New York, um, but that is not. I don't know. That's when you're a partner at a publicity firm, your pay is low at 125 grand. I don't know. Am I out of touch, or is that like that's a decent amount? Neither Jones nor anyone else at Jones Works advised her against doing so, right? Using her personal phone number was just dumb. Yeah, I mean, like putting her personal information on here, saying that, oh, nobody advised her against doing so. If you'd have taken 2 seconds to go Google it, everyone would tell you don't do it. Jones Lewis did not have any internal policies that prohibited such use, gave it the right to monitor such use, or divest employees of a reasonable expectation of privacy in relation to such use. It does not matter. You know, I think there's been some conversation about California law from what I've read, and again, not a lawyer, this is not legal advice. From a quick skim reading of it, California gives you some great protections if you are using your personal device, and the, you know, worker are asking you to, you know, put stuff on it, and or maybe they're paying for the subscription, but you're using your device. All of that goes out the window the moment you use a company device. So all of this is not the case if you're using a company device. It doesn't matter whether they have internal policies that prohibit it. The assumption is there's no right to privacy. They own all of it. They can watch and monitor all of your use on it, at least as far as I know from like a basic skim reading. Now, I'm sure actual legal experts will be able to talk about the exceptions to this, and maybe there are some different rules in states or pieces of this, but it doesn't seem a strong argument based off a quick skim reading from a complete amateur who has never taken any sort of class in law and no degree of law. Let's just make that very clear, right? From the 5-minute school of Google University, it doesn't seem to be the case. And again, like, you know, as we've gone through this case, that would have given me a lot of pause at the beginning of this, of like, I am talking about this as a complete amateur. I have a lot of faith that even, you know, as much as I don't have a great deal of like personal respect for the lawyers in this case, right? Based on their actions and the way they've conducted themselves in the media, I would at least also have like a little bit of professional respect for them in saying that they are lawyers, they are smart, they have clearly, you know, had to put in this effort and trained and studied and passed the bar. So I wouldn't have this assumption that I know more than them, or that, you know, they would be intentionally being deceitful. As this has gone on, though, that doubt that I have has kind of been completely eroded, and I feel a lot more confident just because we've talked about this so often now, and seen so many of these, like, that doesn't seem right, and then it's followed through, that like I'm kind of, it's almost as if like you're building on those successes that you've had of like, oh, making these guesses. Now, the danger here is you get overconfident and think that you're smarter than you are. But I definitely view a lot of like these sentences in here with a lot more suspicion of I don't necessarily think that's correct, and I'm not going to just accept it because Brian Friedman says so, because again, going back to what happened with the Wayfarer one, they threw out a bunch of it because they were wrong. They guessed and guessed wrong. And it is insane to me that we're putting out these lawsuit complaints with just guess. Just guess and hope nobody calls bullshit. Like, it's an insane way to conduct yourself as a lawyer, I think. I would not have guessed that lawyers behave this way. So anyway, thus Abel had no reason whatsoever to believe that Jonesworks' ownership of the physical device would or could in any way compromise her right to privacy and the personal data or accounts stored on it are accessible for it. Then you never talk to a lawyer. It's essentially all we got to say about that. And it's wild that your lawyers are now making that argument. Jonesworks would not have any right to access or monitor, for example, her personal email accounts, text messages, phones, or bank accounts. This is where it starts to get tricky, because this, from what I can see, is like a maybe, like, or a no with an asterisk, because there are some conditions on here. And I think this is where like they've got maybe some grounds to fight and kind of make a good question about this. Let's see what we got, chat. Junk Farm says, I knew not to use company devices as a retail peon. She's supposed to be an executive. Yup. Caspian says, late but here. Could I trouble you for a super quick recap? Sure. Caspian, super quick recap. They have amended the answers from Wayfarer and Abel in the Jones versus Abel case, because they're putting in the details of the subpoena. It hasn't dramatically changed Wayfarer's counterclaims. They've added that information in, but it hasn't changed their counterclaims dramatically. As we're going to go through Abel's, you're going to see that there's not a ton of difference in her complaint. There's some new pieces. It does dramatically change her counterclaims. We're going to get into the consequences for that. Outside of that, what we have is everybody's added new lawyers to the case. Baldoni has specifically hired a new lawyer who is a longtime friend and member of the Wayfarer Foundation's board, who's also a member of the Baha'i faith. I think that's concerning for Abel, because it again shows that she might not be getting the best legal representation, especially when there's a conflict of interest versus her interests versus, say, Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer, when most of the lawyers and legal team are connected directly and have personal relationships with them. I think, again, we would really want to see Abel get her own representation to get the best legal advice. And then finally, Marvel have filed a motion to quash the subpoena for all of the nice pool stuff, basically saying it's relevant, it's too broad, there's a huge risk of the stuff being leaked given that everybody's talking to the press. We'd very much like you to either say no, we don't have to produce this stuff, or if we do, wait until the motion to dismiss is decided, because we don't even know if the defamation claims against Ryan Reynolds that include the nice pool stuff are even going to survive. So there you go. There's a quick recap. Hopefully that was quick enough. So yeah, so I think, again, there's a question mark on this. I think that's, for the most part, it's wrong, but there might be some piece of that. Where are we at? We're at 27. So let me see. Counter 26 to flourish. Carrying on. Most of the stuff is all the stuff we talked about. You know, she talks about that, you know, she did there was the piece that we talked about with Business Insider, shed more light on the real Jones. Well, yeah, because, you know, Abel was actively participating in that. I saw that there was an article today about her use of psychics that was in here as well. I am just going to jump to that for a second, because I saw an article about it in here, that Jones had always been volatile. That, you know, she was learning through psychic readings that Abel was an alcoholic and a gambling addict. This was also in the original complaint, but for some reason, it didn't get picked up. I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Oh yeah, there it is. That Abel was an alcoholic and a gambling addict. I don't know why. You know, again, this was like 319 or whatever. I don't know why this is now getting picked up as a news story when it was in the original complaint, because this hasn't changed. But they're like, oh, you know, they're going after Jones by saying she called Abel an alcoholic. And also that, you know, Jones announced that per her psychic, Abel would be pregnant with twins, despite the fact that Abel had struggled with fertility issues, which is messed up. Let's be real, that's messed up. Um, but anyway, it was also in the original as well. So I don't know why only of a sudden this has now become a news story. Abel had no involvement in Stephanie Jones leaks. Yeah, that's what she claims. But we will see. Who's Jed? We're all Jed. We are all Jed Wallace. That is what we've covered a couple of times. The Jed Wallace is the smear campaigns we made along the way. That's what we learned. All right. They get into a little bit of when we're talking about when she gets kicked out, right? She's kind of really selling the when she gets dismissed and fired. Is this in here? Yeah, here we go. So she cuts originally that, she's caught off guard and Abel fell into a state of shock. She had no idea, fearful she would burst into tears and humiliate herself. They change it. Caught completely off guard, Abel was in shock over the hostile and intimidating display. Having never experienced anything she knew how to do, she fearful she would burst into tears. Where are we? She talks about where she completely disassociates. I thought that was here. But maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, she says she signed the documents in the hope, and then she did not digest their contents. I could have sworn this was the one where she talked about she disassociated, but I guess not. Oh, there it is. Yes, it is. She would burst into tears and humiliate herself. She disassociated. They, I guess that was in the original as well. But, knew that she wrongly wanted to get out of there. They added some more flourish into there. Given the coercion and threats by Jones' Works attorney, Abel understood she could not leave without signing the documents, at least not without subjecting herself to legal action. Under extreme duress, she signed the documents. So they added that little piece of flourish. She signs the papers and then she hands over her personal laptop. Again, they kind of add a little more to this, talking about she signed the papers, she handed over her personal laptop. Following the fruitless search of her laptop, Dern demanded that Abel hand over her phone, after which security would escort her out of the building. Abel was ordered to provide the passcode, which he was told was solely to facilitate the release of her phone number. While Abel had agreed to provide access to her laptop for a limited search, she did not consent to and was not asked to consent to a search of the contents of the iPhone. It's a work device. It's a work device. I don't know how many times we have to say it's a work device. Like, she doesn't get to consent to the contents of the iPhone. But then she argues that because she'd been ambushed, right? Remember, she'd been ambushed about this meeting. She'd not had sufficient warning or time to wipe personal information from the phone, deregister it from her personal iCloud or email accounts, or otherwise secure the vast troves of personal and private data accessible to it. She had no reason to believe Jones Works would attempt to access her data, nor would she have turned over the device without making prior arrangements to secure it. This, our scientist, is where I want to bring up what you had said. I'm just going to bring it up here. I saw this over on Baldoni Files, and I just wanted to put this out. That's before we even touch on the fact that she knew she was being dismissed early before she went into that final meeting. She was bragging about how she was going to go through all of her grievances to Nathan that morning. It's like, girl, you should have been extracting your personal data and deleting it from that phone instead. 100% this. Again, bringing up Jones's original complaint. I think it's the second page, was it? Where is it? No, I can't remember where it is. Where she talks about, like, I'm going to go, like, get all of this stuff out of them because I'm going to go see the chief of staff. You should see what I'm asking them. Where is it? We're gonna have to slowly go. No, it's sad, you think? No. No. It's not this. Come in. No, so this is all of her stuff with Katie Warren. We're going to war. Thanks for chatting. Holding them hostage. Here we go. I'm having my offboarding this morning with our chief of staff, a joke because Steph won't face me. And you should see the list of things I'm making to bring up. I need the list. Holding them hostage. It's wild. Exactly how business should be done. Like, oh my gosh, like, how are you going to turn around now and say, like, you were ambushed and hadn't had sufficient warning when you're turning around and bragging, like you've talked about, our scientists, that, like, oh, I'm going to hold them hostage and do all this stuff. And what you're not doing is deregistering it from the cloud or protecting your personal information from here at all. It's insane. They come down now, and then we have the story of her going to the Verizon store thinking that she's going to release the phone number, and they don't. They now add on that it took Abel over a month to regain all control to her accounts, right? She learned that Jones had been sharing her private text messages with the entire office, mocking and disparaging her. Having touched Abel's privacy and dignity, Jones started boasting that Abel's business was next. What Abel could not foresee was that Jones and Jonesworks' gross invasion of her privacy would not stop upon her departure. In fact, it escalated. Jonesworks retained access to Abel's iCloud for multiple months thereafter, monitoring and intercepting her private communications in real time. This is where we get the big fact that we learned. Abel's text messages were tied to her iCloud, not her phone number, until Abel changed her iCloud password in January 2025 for unrelated reasons. Jones had been intercepting and monitoring all of her text exchanges, including not only with her clients, fiancé, doctors, parents, and friends, but also with undersigned counsel. Pause for a minute on this one. She got sued in December, right? And they had all of her text messages. She posted to Facebook her whole big thing about, yes, we did unsay it, all of those things, right? So you recognize the text messages, you know they're from your phone, right? December the 20th, you hire legal counsel. That legal counsel then files a complaint against Blake Lively, against the New York Times. We're going after everybody because they have access to your information. No point does that legal counsel ask the important question, does she still have access to your text messages? Maybe you should log out of that phone. Maybe change your password. Not only that, but even in January, when she does change her password, she points out that it's for unrelated reason. What the hell are they paying Brian Friedman for at this point? If your lawyer is not immediately asking the question, hey, they have all your text messages. They don't still have your text messages, do they? This is insane to me, right? This is when I come back to, like, or when I originally started out, I'm like, I'm not smarter than a lawyer. Like, those guys are very smart. Of course they know more than me. Why would I assume? This is the point at which you go, nah. This is amateur hour. This is insane that nobody thought to tell her to change her password. The moment that she got sued with her own text messages from her phone, from the iCloud. Again, this is why I keep saying Abel needs better representation. She needs her own representation because they are not doing a good job of protecting her best interests, because that is the first thing they should have told her, is to make sure that she was logged out of the device, make sure that she changed all of her passwords. If they've got access to your text message, we don't have them anymore. Where I think this is a problem, they talk about that they have her messages with counsel. That means for virtually, a month, they have all of her messages with Brian Friedman or with her lawyer, right? Those are protected communications. They cannot be used, they cannot be exposed, they cannot be looked at, all of that stuff. Unless they are trying to commit a crime, right? Unless they are doing something shady and ethical. And we know that Brian Friedman is knee deep in this. He's good friends with Jed Wallace. I don't know how well Brian Friedman's sleeping right now, but I will say this. If everything that, like, Blake Lively has shown, and the depths of that campaign where Friedman is involved with Jed and knows Jed personally and has a relationship with him, then this could be really bad, because those will not be protected, and those could be very, very damaging for Baldoni's entire case. Again, if. It's a huge if. Not saying there is anything in there. Maybe Brian Friedman is sleeping very well right now because he has nothing to worry about. Maybe. or maybe he's not sleeping so great. But anyway, this is crazy that they didn't tell her to change her password. It's crazy that she didn't think to do it, and that they had all of this. Now, they're saying that she has been intercepting and monitoring. They don't show any evidence for this. And as far as I'm aware, you would have IP logs or you would have access logs based on the device, based on the location. They should be able to show something in the complaint. They don't. So it'd be interesting to me if they're just assuming that she had access, or whether they have some evidence that Jones was indeed monitoring her text messages. Messaging says, wait, Nathan was telling Abel and Baldoni to get legal counsel in August. Yep, they were telling them to get Brian Friedman to go after WME in August. So long before he gets dropped by WME. It's only shortly after Reynolds supposedly, allegedly said the Predator comments to them, they were ready and gearing up for a legal fight with WME. So I think there's a lot more behind the scenes we haven't seen and don't know about yet, because why would they be ready to go fight legally with WME? And then why did they not? Right? Their whole thing with Reynolds is that the contract failed and they lost job opportunities for it. If they were going to fight WME in August, what changed to where they now don't want to take them to court? It's interesting. Drink Farm says Nathan wanted them to hire Friedman. Yeah, and again, like, is there a connection there? Is there a reason that Nathan wanted Friedman and knew Friedman? Had they worked together? All of this stuff. It's interesting. So they're saying she had it for months. Most of this stuff is all the same, and then 79 is new. So again, they talk about, her being in the account, Jones being not there, her being in Europe, undermining Abel's authority, which is strange if you're going to argue that Abel was just an employee following orders. So then they kind of come out and say that notwithstanding General Jones's disengagement, it's not true she was kept in the dark. To the extent she was out of the loop, it was by choice. She was copied on virtually all communications during this period and privy to Wayfarer's predicament and its chosen strategy of non-confirmation. Again, we have his own timeline that shows that it was Jones who was telling them that, like, hey, we want to go positive. We don't want to go negative. And they shut her down and told her to, like, stop, contradicting the rest of the team. We want everybody to be aligned. And Heath was like, no, thank you, right? We've all got to be pulling it, and you're undermining Nathan. So we know that this is not true because they've shown us their own emails that show that this isn't true. Had there been a smear campaign, as was later alleged by her and Lively Parties, Jones would have undoubtedly known about it in real time. I have been deeply involved in planning account management and high-level PR media as well as crisis, admitted in an email. I think she did. I think she had a suspicion that there was, and that Nathan was doing this stuff. She just couldn't prove any of it, right? I think that was really the fight that Jones had with Wayfarer and over Nathan, was that she wanted to go positive. So at the time, Lively and Babylonian's teams negotiated an easy truce. We talked about that. That's not what happened. They negotiated a truce because Nathan got found out that she was talking to the Daily Mail, and it was a last-ditch effort from her to try and get things to de-escalate. They talk really about all of that, and again, like I say, I'll probably post to Baldoni Files and the actual, like, full layout of that. Her talking that she needed to contact Sony. I think this is all old as well. This is the only one that they talked about here, that someone from Baldoni's team had communicated to the media it was Jones, and we know that that's not true because Nathan says it wasn't Jones. And then the old 92 got removed. The old 92. Old 92 is where they talk about the subpoena, I think, again, right? This is where they talk about yeah, they again deleted this one out. So Jones agreed to stand down after they told her to stand down, and they say that on the same day, Leslie Sloan called Nathan. During that call, Nathan told her that she had seen the text messages. They delete that out of here. It's gone in the amended version. Old 97. This is where they boldly proclaimed that there was no subpoena and that they'd given over Abel's phone to Lively and her team without a subpoena. That gets removed in here as well. I can't remember where it is. There it is, in turning over these materials. So that gets ripped out as well. And then, 90 all the way to the end is all new. So talking about that, they did disclose at least some of the private communications because Sloan, Lively's publicist, confirmed as much to Nathan. Sloan gloated that based on what she had already seen, Nathan could expect to be sued. So now they've walked back that they got all of the text messages. They got, Sloan saw some of them. Now we're just saying vaguely that based on what she had seen. We don't know what. Again, they're trying to re-emphasize that those communications were all held in the iCloud, despite lacking Abel's consent to access, review, or disseminate these communications. But again, if these are work communications, it doesn't matter. And most of them are. So this is, I think, where it's going to get interesting in this case is, if those work communications are held on servers that are in her personal iCloud, but are work communications, do they have access to them? I don't see any way in which the answer is not an affirmative, but we shall see. Because again, I don't think the law's caught up to, cloud servers and all the rest of the stuff, which is why I think this might end up being a really interesting case. Where they get interesting, they talk about the Van Zandt lawsuit again, like we covered in Wayfarers. I'm not really going to talk about it because, they've already talked about it. Now, they do now dramatically change their causes of action. The first cause of action was against Jones and Jones Works for her breach of contract, right? Her employment contract. They then go after her for a violation of labor law. I think because of, if I remember rightly, the choice of law violates her California labor code, so they can't force her to have New York law apply. The third cause was this restraint of trade, saying that limitation and non-competition and non-solicitation were limiting her and that we're not valid in California. And then finally, they went for unfair competition, stating that she needs to be able to conduct her business, and so preventing her from being able to take Wayfair as a client is kind of restrictive to her, and that California protects from a lot of these like non-compete clauses, right? And so because it's written under New York law, it's fine, but they're arguing that that can't be the case here. All of that gets tossed out. We have entirely new causes of action, I think, all the way up to the fifth. Fourth is violation of the Penal Code. Yeah. So fourth one, violation of labor code's gone. And then we get to this one, intrusion, invasion of privacy. That's where we come back to the original causes. So her first 5 causes are gone. And instead they're replaced with, firstly, violation of Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. They're alleging that Jones didn't have access to the computers. Now, they're not arguing that she didn't have access to the phone. Where they're going with this is where I think is interesting. They're going to say, I think, where is it? Abel's private data is held in iCloud, which is held on remote servers for Apple and Google, and therefore, because Jones was intentionally accessing those protected computers without permission or consent, that then exceeds her authorization to look at the work device because she's looking at those remote servers. This actually, I think, is one of those areas where, in reading up on this week, there's actually a paper that somebody had written, who was like I think a prospective JD, who'd written an article about how this particular act, this law, the CFAA, hasn't really caught up to the reality of how we host things on remote servers now, and that technically, yes, an employer accessing information that would be stored in your cloud on your Google Drive or in your Apple iCloud would be technically and as written a violation of CFAA. And so this actually might have some room. This is why I say, like, oh, I think this might actually be a good thing. Some decent lawyering finally, because this, I think, is a big enough gray area that this might survive. Just because this, I don't think, has been fully worked out in terms of accessing this. Now, where it's going to come down to is, I don't know if it's sufficiently pled. We'll find out in the motions to dismiss, because I don't think they've got enough specificity on like what data was accessed, when. They don't give any details of, IP addresses or dates or when these things, they're just alleging that it was accessed at some point. And it's like, you need to have some more specificity to it. And also, can we prove that that data was accessed on those remote servers and not the data that's on the computer? Or sorry, I should say the phone. Gosh. So that I think is interesting. I think that might be decent. That might be survive. The second one is the violation of the Stored Communications Act. Again, they're saying that they're intentionally accessed without authorization or tries to go through. It feels very duplicative of it. I don't know if they're trying to argue here that, in terms of electronic storage, they're trying to access the phone without authorization. That's not going to stand because of, it being a work device. They talk about the data transmitted because of the cloud would constitute electronic communications, and that's what they're going after. Like it would, coming out of the cloud or something. I don't know. Again, I don't necessarily feel that would be survive, because again, I think that would really undermine an employer's ability to examine the data that's on a work computer. And then they go for violations of the Federal Wiretap Act. This one I don't necessarily think is as strong as well. But again, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I did some reading up on some of this stuff today. And the Wiretap Act, really, there's a lot of provisions that are carved out of this. I don't necessarily think this really fits in it, because the intent of that really is more like intentional eavesdropping and stuff like that. It doesn't really work here, and there are exceptions carved out that I was looking at. In terms of if you're using if a subscriber uses a device. So in terms of using your own telephone, it doesn't work for that. They talk about here, furnish any telephone furnished subscriber or used by provider. It's an exception. So basically, otherwise you could be guilty of listening to your own phone conversation, basically. So they kind of carve this out. So I think that would cover this. I don't know, right? I think, again, these are good in terms of like, I don't know. This is where they're probably going to need to actually cite some case law and go through this to kind of say that these apply. These feel a lot stronger because of the giant unknowns about them. Now, maybe the motions to dismiss come up and they just absolutely hammer this and show that they're being misapplied. And then they're going for, violation of the California Penal Code because of accessing the computer. It's pretty serious. Again, her personal Gmail account, email obtained by her business. Again, those are pretty serious and pretty protected. I don't know how that works with her putting it on her phone. There's a huge problem of like, if you put your personal stuff on your work phone, a lot of workplaces have policies that you are not allowed to put your personal data onto there. And so if you had put it on like this, you wouldn't be able to kind of assert these claims because you would already have violated company policy by putting it on. Where Jones has a problem is Abel says there was no device policy stating that. So like, I don't know. All right, so let's do chat. Apparently, maybe you guys can correct me. Nope, the device had permission. That's what I mean, like the device had permission, but this is one of the things where it still gets kind of gray, because as a computer engineer, I vaguely remember that if I enter my password right into the computer and leave it unlocked and somebody accesses the device, that is still highly illegal for them to access that computer knowing that they didn't have authorization, even if I leave my password on here. And so I wonder if on the work device, where they're being logged into iCloud under a device, if it's that same sort of thing. I don't know enough. This is where I'm like, I think, we need lawyers to come in who really know this stuff to kind of give some commentary on it. Casper says, my flabbers are gasted. Alzheimer says, plus she could access the messages without connecting to the cloud. They were already in the device when Jones took custody. Yeah, and I think, that's where it's going to come in, is how can they prove they actually access the iCloud version, not the ones on the phone? I don't know. Don't know enough about iPhone to know if you can make that distinction. Marcy Jinx is law tuber, not liar. Yeah, I think some of these people probably are. I think they would have to proactively sign in to commit a crime. Something pops up on Joseph's phone. She's allowed to read it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, John Paul. They need an intervention. They're so lost with where they're going. Bellamy says, Abel had many emails going by her text. Yeah, I think that's the other thing is like, she's got her personal Gmail. She's got her what's it, her email account maintained by her business to RWA, and then she's also got her JonesWorks email as well. So I don't know. Bellman says Jones only exposed work-related communications personal. Yeah, and so but that's why they're going after accessed and monitored rather than disseminated and shared, right? So they've got rid of all of these complaints. Where I think the bigger problem is this, right, is because I don't know these claims, right? I don't know how likely these are. Where I think they have a bigger problem, and this comes back to that comment about boilerplate, is in both the Wayfarer and the Abel one. It's less of a problem in the Wayfarer one because Wayfarer doesn't really change their causes of actions. They just add some new paragraphs to kind of throw some red meat to the internet creators to talk about the sham lawsuit in Van Zandt so they can generate some press out of it. It's very clear that the amendments they made to their complaint from the Wayfarer side don't change anything. They don't impact their case at all, right? With Abel's, there's probably, I mean, what is there? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 changes. And then let's just go back up and see how many new paragraphs there are. Because these are all the causes. Come back up. There's about 10 change paragraphs. And then from like 90 all the way to the end is where the new ones are. So there's about another 10. So it's about 20. So about 20 paragraphs have changed in Abel's, right? So it's mostly still the same thing, still the same complaint. 200. So you're looking about like what, 10, 20%. 80 to 90% of her complaint is the same, even though she has completely changed her top 4 causes of action. Now, you typically lead with your strongest causes of action. So the fact that they originally filed this with all of these labor law, contractual stuff, and those have disappeared, show that they never really had a strong claim to those, or they don't feel they had a strong claim, because now they've changed those completely to put in the computer fraud stuff, because that they feel they've got a much stronger case. So it shows that the original complaint wasn't really that strong in the first place, which is what we all kind of suspected anyway, right? The fact that 80 to 90% of the complaint is the same, however, and their causes of actions are completely different, to me suggests their complaint doesn't really support the causes of action. If you change completely your causes of action, if I come to you and tell you a story, if I say to you, hey, I've got this story, I'm going to give it to you, and it's going to explain how, I was they violated my privacy, it's against labor law and breached my contract, and you go, great. And you go, oh, actually, I'm not going after them for that. I'm going after them for computer fraud. And you're like, oh, great, tell me that story. And you go, it's mostly the same story. It's just 2 little pieces that are different. It really undermines that complaint is not supporting those causes of action, right? It is not a narrative that supports a particular damage or complaint that you are making legally. It is like what they have said in their original, in the Wayfarer complaint, and accused Jones of. It's boilerplate. 80 to 90% of their complaint is just them generically spinning a story and then tacking on a couple of paragraphs to support their causes of action at the end. And that's shown by the fact that they can just completely remove their causes of actions, put in different ones, change a couple of pieces, and it goes out the door. I don't know, not a judge, not a lawyer. I know I've said that a lot tonight. I'm going to keep saying it. If I was a judge and I got presented with that, this would piss me off, because it shows to me that like your story that you're coming to the court with, that you are petitioning for relief, is bogus, because there's so little of it that actually supports the causes of actions. And if that was the case, if you change the cause of action, your entire complaint should mostly change. Now, maybe I am way off base here, right? I have not seen a ton of lawsuits. These are the first ones I've seen. Maybe I'm being hopelessly optimistic and misguided, and maybe 90% of lawsuits are very, very similar. But to me, if you come to that story and they are so similar, yet they are drastically different causes of actions, I don't think that complaint upholds those causes of actions. I don't know. I would love if those of you in chat could tell me, am I way off base here? Or like, would you have that same feeling as a judge? While you think on that, I'm going to jump back into chat. Heidi the Sausage says, I think it's standard in I think it's standard in Australia under employment contracts. I think that's correct. Obi-Wan Kenobi says, first thing she should have done is say my account has been hacked, 100%. As soon as you've got the text messages in the legal complaint, that CRD complaint comes out, the New York Times article comes out, you should have changed your passwords and done everything. Ruthie says, my guess would be that would be down to a contract signed for that job. I've never had a job that remotely involved a device or account I owned without a clear contract about me. I again, same Ruthie, right? Like most of the times I've gone into an employer, but you know, I think it's very different. I work in IT, I work with technology companies, so we always have a very clear and very specific hardware policy and electronic communications policy, and they are very, very clear. No expectation of privacy across all of our corporate communications devices, whether that be email or internal messaging systems. Any work device we are given, we are not allowed to install personal stuff on it. Now, does personal stuff happen to go on there sometimes? Sure, but I think it's more to cover themselves in cases like this where if they took control of the device and my personal information is on it, they're not liable because they said point blank, don't put your personal stuff on it, which I think is where JonesWorks might have a problem because they, according to Abel, did not have that policy, but I don't know. I mean, Obi-Wan Kenobi says 2 separate devices. She did this to herself. Can't feel bad for her. Not exactly the job is creating. Again, I think, you know, the poverty complaint just doesn't work when you're making 125 grand. I don't know that you can't just get an Android device as well. And what about the Android device she had? Right? Like, this is what I don't get is she had an Android device. They gave her an iPhone. She could have kept using the Android and then got like I hear Mint Mobile does really cheap unlimited plans. Or too soon to make a Mint Mobile joke. Anyway, but she could have done her own call plan on her own Android phone. Anyway, Ruth says, I mean, minimally, don't leave too many tracks of you talking crap about your employer or your job's private details, right? I think that's the bigger one, right? Is regardless of all this, don't talk shit about your employer on your employee device. And then don't be upset when the rest of the company gets those text messages and realizes you've been talking crap about the other employees as well. So I don't know. Love the name of this episode. Stephanie Jones's attorneys were on Extra. Billy Bush was interviewing them after he smeared Blake. I wonder if she sees things differently now. Oh, Bell Moon, that was wild to me because, you know, Friedman has been talking to TMZ relentlessly for weeks, and I'm going to bring up that article in a second. And yet, TMZ talk once to I think Stephanie Jones and Blake Lively's lawyers, right? I think, or if it were they both Stephanie Jones' attorneys? But anyway, Stephanie Jones' attorneys are on TMZ once, and I saw so many people who were Baldoni defenders now saying that TMZ is biased. TMZ has been bought. They are not. They have no journalistic integrity. You're like, oh, TMZ, you say? TMZ are not a bastion of journalistic integrity? My goodness, you don't say. I thought that was amusing to me to see them kind of realizing that, oh my goodness, after months of just giving Brian Friedman free reign, now they're suddenly like, oh, they're biased and they're just doing this for clicks. Yeah. Heidi says, if she had a non-compete clause, she had a device clause. I don't know. We'll see. They say no, and we haven't seen her contract yet, so maybe they do. Maybe that comes up in the motions to dismiss. Could have gotten Mint Mobile device. Yeah, 100%. Junk Farm says, don't forget they made Abel sign a document too. I bet a lot of this is waived by Abel in that doc. They were absolutely nailing with an attorney in forensic extraction. It's a really good point, Junk Farm, because at that point they knew she was stealing documents and they had a lawyer present, the company lawyer present. I would be interested to know what those documents that she signed were, and it probably is something about handing over that device or any interest in the device, and that any personal information that still remains on the device, she waives her right to and stuff like that. So I don't know. Always hilarious how she talks crap about don't even listen, Nathan. I mean, it's eye-opening, right? Don't ever get a PR person, because or if you do, make sure you have the phone that their iCloud is logged into so you can see all their messages and make sure they're not talking crap about you. Master Jinx, Mint Mobile, always at the scene of the crime, always there, always watching, always listening. Mint Mobile. See, free advert. Heidi says, if they want to understand your character, it's all right there. Obi says, if the rest of us can pay for our own while she's using her employers just for work, pretty sure she'd have been fine too. Yeah, yeah. All right. Master G says, same thing happened with the Depp case. Say one neutral thing and you're working for Amber Heard's lesbian PR team. Oh, it gets, yes, I've gone through this because the Baldoni defenders found the podcast that I did where I talked about my history as a survivor of domestic violence, and I talked about how triggering the Depp case was for me, and it was the reason why I stayed out of really wading into it and making any content about it or talking about it, because very early on I was very triggered by it because of I'd heard the voice recording Amber Heard saying, you know, tell the world that I hate you, you know, that Johnny Depp, like no one's going to believe you. And that was very triggering for me because that was something that was very relatable to my experience. They took that and then were running with the idea that I am some Johnny Depp defender and that I stand by him, and oh, they, you know, the Blake Lively fans won't be happy when they find out that he stands by you know, Johnny Depp and that he's a defender of him. And I was like, that's not what I said at all. But yes, it's wild how they just take one little thing and then all of a sudden you are for one side or the other, and you are evil. And it's also funny because half of them are actually like Johnny Depp defenders, so like, I don't know why they would. Crazy to me, but no, I mean, it's very clear to me, and I think this is one of the reasons why I stepped up in this particular case. Was I do feel like I missed the boat, right? I screwed up. I got so into my own feelings and said like I was going to stay out of that conversation because it was so triggering for me, and that was a mistake. I think I've learned that, and that's why I felt so strongly about wanting to talk about this and keep doing these live streams and keep talking about this, was partly because the way that I covered or didn't cover the Amber Heard case was it was a mistake on my part. So I definitely felt more compelled to talk about this. But as you know from like when I talked about it on YouTube, I also felt like I was coming out from a very personal place and I needed permission from all of you to engage and indulge in it, because I knew that this was something that was not necessarily just content for me. It was something that I felt very personal about. So I appreciate you guys for indulging me, and I'm glad that we're kind of hanging out, having this kind of fun. So, but yeah, it is something that is very personal for me. All right, lighten the mood and we'll move on, right? All right, so having said all of that, I don't think that this is really great for his case because it shows just how flimsy his complaints are. I did want to kind of go into the TMZ article. This is where I kind of want to wrap up for tonight. Master Jinx says, it was super triggering. My mental health definitely suffered, so don't feel bad taking care of yourself. Now, I think it was very raw for me, and that particular thing was that particular soundbite. And I know now, obviously, there's a lot more context behind it, but in that moment, it was a lot for me. It was a lot for me, you know. Still have these little moments. It's very interesting to me, and I talked about this on TikTok about how like we went to go see The Shining, right? And in the scene that I have seen a million times where Jack is breaking into the bathroom, you see it on like every clip show and all the rest of it. Totally fine. Watching that scene in context in the movie, again, it being something that relates to me personally, super different experience, and I was still very, very caught up in that moment for me, and that was like, whew. So I still have some moments. There are still some triggers there that I'm still working through. You have to process that stuff in your own way, so don't be so hard on yourself. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very grateful for my wife, who is incredibly supportive of that, and of the fact that healing is a journey, and it's not always a straight line, and there are all those little pieces. So yeah. TMZ's Mark Gergaros is the good friend and sometimes liar of Friedman. Oh, Atticus, you are hitting on a whole landmine of stuff there. I'm hoping to have next week's live stream. We're going to talk about that. I'm currently doing the deep dive research about it. We might, depending on if there's a very little action on the Blake Lively side, jump into another Brian Friedman case, because I think we're going to talk and continue this conversation about ethics and Brian Friedman's lawyering, because I think there's a huge thing there. I was going to maybe cover it today. We're kind of running a little over where I wanted to be on time. But I think I want to cover it next week because I want to do a much bigger deep dive into that whole case and show you some of the really unethical, shady lawyering that's going on in that case. So if you're interested, we might take a break momentarily from Lively versus Baldoni to talk more about Brian Friedman and his tactics in one of the other cases with Mark Gargaris. So anyway, okay. So this is the article where, they filed these amended complaints. And of course, Brian Friedman went off to go and, do his whole thing on TMZ, talking about, in light of new evidence that being uncovered almost daily, it has become imperative to amend our counterclaims against Stephanie Jones and Jones Works. We are not surprised at all that Ms. Jones would instruct her legal team to go on record and mischaracterize the circumstances in the sham subpoena and Van Zandt lawsuit so impressively uncovered by the passionate group of online sleuths. Pause here for a second. This is another thing where I'm like, why are we paying Brian Friedman? Again, he's now literally admitting that, like, oh, in light of new evidence being uncovered, they don't have any evidence, right? The evidence that has come up has been the Van Zandt lawsuit and subpoena, which from the very start, back in December, he said there was no subpoena. It was a sham. They never complied with any legal subpoena. It's all nonsense. They've made it up. And now here we are in April and found out that for the last, 4 months, he's done no work to find that subpoena and had to rely on the Daily Mail to do it, right? Now, there's a part of this that might be that Brian Friedman was the one to leak the subpoena to the Daily Mail. We still don't know who leaked the subpoena to the Daily Mail, to Page Six, and to Deadline April 10th. So we don't know who leaked it. It could well be that Friedman did it, knew the subpoena all along, and leaked it to them, and this is all him just generating press. That's a thing that could have happened. It could have also come from Jones, right? We don't know. But if you're hiring him and you're paying him these hundreds of dollars, and he is now saying basically, hey, we changed and amended our entire legal strategy. We burned our first 4 causes of actions. We have put in all new causes of actions because Reddit told us some new stuff and we thought we'd get our legal strategy from Reddit. I would be very concerned. When your lawyer says, hey, we're going to amend our complaint, I got a hot Reddit. I don't know, that doesn't make me feel great about the level of lawyering that is going on in this case, when you are literally shouting out the online sleuths for shaping and informing your legal strategy. I also don't think it's impressive for you to go and state that publicly, so that when you walk into the court and you're before Judge Lyman, Lyman is also fully aware that your legal strategy is being informed by Redditors. That does not seem to me to be the way to win over a court. But anyway, they carry on talking about the Van Sham lawsuit. Hey, they love a good name. Makes it clear that they've been caught engaging in their own smear campaign. Like, that's not what a smear campaign is. Intentionally circumventing the normal procedures for improper purposes by creating a farcical complaint with an unrelated plaintiff and no named defendants, ensuring that no one would know about or object to their attempt to obtain information they were not entitled to. Yeah, I mean, the issue with this is Friedman has done the same thing. I didn't grab the screenshots for this. Friedman's done the same thing. He's created lawsuits that have DOE defendants in them. Notably, what I have right off the top of my head is, his lawsuit against against Justin Baldoni. That when Brian Friedman represented Travis Flores, the terminally ill cystic fibrosis patient who claimed that Justin Baldoni had stolen the screenplay for what was it? Oh gosh, I forget what it's called. right? Was it 3 feet distant, 5 feet apart, whatever? I apologize, I forgot the correct ways for the names, but basically for the movie, um, when Brian Friedman represented Travis Flores, he also included a does 1 through 100 inclusive in his lawsuit. Friedman has also filed multiple lawsuits where there are only Doe defendants. So this is a tactic that Friedman himself has engaged in multiple times. So I mean, it's wild that he's out here calling out the other team for it when he's done it too. Um, but I mean, it's nothing new from him, right? That he's so willing to call out them for his own behavior. Anyway, um, they also had Jonesworks lawyers come in, and this was, they call out exactly what I just talked about, right? That reversing course, dropping previously touted claims, presenting zero new evidence, and putting out the world's longest and most confusing statement. What a desperate ploy by a team who tonight admit but admits they are in trouble. Behind their empty gusto, you'll find not even an attempt to defend the misdeeds laid bare by their evidence. Quite telling. Um, yeah, this is the problem I think they have is again, amending their complaint in this way. The boilerplate has still stayed the same, but they've dramatically changed their causes of action with no new evidence, no new claims. I mean, they're literally just saying, well, she accessed the device. Based on what? Do you have IP logs? Do you got any record of her accessing the device? They don't. So I don't know how this is going to survive. So it will be interesting to see the motions to dismiss that come in now because of it. The other thing that I thought was funny is because they've come in and amended their complaint, Judge Lyman today issued an order denying the motions to dismiss as moot, right? Because these complaints have been amended, those previous motions to dismiss no longer apply. So they've been struck down. I saw Baldoni defenders celebrating this as a win, saying that Jones's motion to dismiss had been denied. I don't know how desperate for a win you have to be to dramatically misrepresent what this means. It is just the fact that because the complaints have been amended, we're stopping the old process because they no longer apply to the new counterclaims. And yet they were cheering on about couldn't have happened to a nicer person. Like, what is going on? That it's crazy. It's crazy how they are. All right, we'll wrap up with chat, and then like I say, next week we will hopefully, if everything goes to plan, dig into Friedman's other lawsuit, and we'll also touch onto the Wallace motion to dismiss that was filed today. All right, let's see what we got. Atticus, oh my gosh, chat is going crazy. What I will also do while we're here, because I think I have, yeah, I got free memberships to give out as well. So while we're here, for everybody sticking around who has stuck with us tonight, I will throw out 5 free memberships. All right, so let's go to chat. My lady says, new evidence uncovered daily is such a wild and obviously false claim to make. I mean, they've made this since December. We talked about this last week. They had new evidence. They never amended their complaints with that new evidence. We've never seen the new evidence. Who knows what that new evidence is? They've had new evidence for 4 months and it's not been amended to their complaint. Atticus says, pretty sure that's how the New York Times article comment copy sent to Baldoni got leaked to TMZ. Good Bobby. Yeah, I mean, we know that it got leaked to TMZ very early in the morning, and they responded very late at night. So, I mean, again, TMZ are going to get part of this. They're going to find out. I think there is a world in which we find out that Friedman has been leaking all of this. The subpoena, the CRD complaint, everything at every step of the time. I don't know that it necessarily impacts his career, right? I mean, it seems to be like that's his sort of lawyering, but yeah, it'd be pretty damning if it finds out that all of these leaks are essentially still coming from like Melissa Nathan and Brian Friedman rather than from anybody else. Obi-Wan Kenobi says lies by TikTok, research by Reddit. I mean, again, I wouldn't mind that job, right? Being a legal aid, being paid legal aid salary to just sit and pull up legal theories from Reddit. Between that and Chat GPT, I think we got a good legal case. Lolly means settle. Yeah, I saw that as well. I don't remember if they talked in this. I don't think they call it out in here. But in the TMZ interview with her lawyers, they asked them if they would settle, and Jones's lawyers say never. And again, Baldoni's defenders took that as, oh well, why is she wanting to settle? And it's like, she's not saying she wants to settle. She's saying she's open to settling because, you know, lawsuits are expensive. And if she can shut it down early, great. I think it's a call to Abel, again, knowing that she's getting bad representation and that there's this desire maybe to get her to settle and to kind of pull that out and then maybe get her to become, you know, a compliant witness for the other side, maybe. I don't know. Because, you know, Abel definitely needs her own representation and needs to split away from Wayfarer because it's very clear they don't have her interests at heart. And that's only going to continue as they continue to hire more people and lawyers and aides and stuff that have connections to Wayfarer. So it's a lot. New law for the term Reddit lawyer. Honestly, I would love to see like Reddit lawyer as a title. That'd be awesome. This feet distant, 5 feet apart is the movie, 3 feet distant as far as the script. Thank you, milady. The original name made more sense. That was mentioned when he appeared on their Angry Men podcast. Oh, I don't think I've seen that. Nancy Jenks, he's super unethical, so it could lend credence to his claim. Okay, well, good to know. All right, so let's see. We got Sylvain, yay, has got a membership. Fortuna, Biku Joe, RES, and the Spinster. Congratulations, guys. It bugs me they reset to 0 and then have to start over time-wise. Yeah, it does, but I think again, like, you know, this is part of the process and, you know, it's always the way forward. And I think as they continue to keep changing and shifting, it just shows that their original claims didn't have any validity. And so I don't think we can expect their new ones to have much either. So we'll see. We'll see. Freeman bullies and settles. Yep. And like I say, we'll get into that next week because that bullying and then settling is a huge part of the ethical dilemma that Friedman is facing over on his other case. Lively's going to settle talking point reruns every. The live thing is going to settle talking point reruns every fortnight. I mean, it's exhausting to see them keep having to change tactics, right? I mean, now we're back to Blake Lively fell for Justin Baldoni. That one's doing the rounds again because you know, we got nothing else to do. When there's so little going on in the legal filings, now it's just all about the gossip and the speculation and those invented stories. And unfortunately, I just think we're going to continue to see that going because these creators now are desperate to make content to keep that thing going. And so it's just going to be these continually obscene, invented stories that don't make any sense. But not here. Here we'll keep to the filings and the stuff that's actually being reported. Brian Freeman is exactly what you picture when you think a smarmy lawyer. He's not doing it. He's not doing lawyers any favors. I'll definitely grant him that. I don't know if I would call him slimy, but again, we're smarmy. Again, we'll see, right? I think this is the thing: is like how much of what we believe about him is true, how much of the actual behavior is really going on, how much of what he's saying is true. So far, it's seemed very little, and he's been wrong so many times. Again, I think this is another reason of what are you paying him for when he keeps getting it wrong? Oh, there was no subpoena. Yeah, there was. You just didn't know about it. Or, again, he knew about it, but he's lying about it. Either way, not great. People are saying that the New York Times is going to settle for 200 million. Marcy Jinx, that's not happening, right? But Sarah Palin's case is probably the closest case to come against winning a defamation case against the New York Times, and that got bounced. Baldoni has no chance. I think most lawyers are saying the New York Times is probably going to be completely out of this. So we'll see. We'll see once those motions to dismiss get finished and we get the decision from the judge. Yeah, no one thinks that. Has the New York Times ever settled a defamation case? I think they have, right? They've never lost a case. And I think that's the distinction is the New York Times, like, oh, they've never lost a case in 60 years. I think they have settled. And that's how they get that high bar of they've never lost. Anyway, all right, guys, well, appreciate you hanging out with me for tonight. Like I say, next week, we will dig into hopefully either Brian Friedman's other case, or there will be a ton of activity in these cases and that we will have to dig into and push that out for a week. But otherwise, as always, if you like what we're doing, remember to like, comment, share the video, help other people to see it. And otherwise, I hope you have a great evening and a great weekend. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. And I will see you all again when we do this next week. All right. Take care, guys. Thank you and have a good one.